Hello, everybody. Good morning. I hope y'all are doing lovely today. And as you can see, look what I'm starting off with. Okay, so I don't annoy y'all and make y'all bored. I'll watch one. I'll watch one. And then we'll watch more Tyler too because I really want to show y'all more of his videos. He's really cool. But yeah. I hope y'all are doing great today and and good morning. Hopefully y'all are doing I think I already said that, but whatever.
Oh.
Yeah. Hopefully y'all are doing lovely today. Upside down, well, upside down heart keeps flipping. But yeah,
I'm dead.
I hope y'all had a great sleep last
So
night.
hard.
Me, I had a lovely sleep last night. I kid you not, as soon as I came home from work, I crashed. I went immediately to bed. It felt good. I had to get some sleep. But yeah, we'll watch one corruption video.
Yeah?
Goodbye. It's literally a decimal frame rate, dude. What the fuck?
Oh, it was actually moving?
Yeah, like very slightly. Oh,
Just die. Just die.
He stomps his foot and it just ends the world.
Thanks.
God.
It's like Thanos snap.
No.
Oh god, now Little Mac's turning into a pancake now.
guys.
Remember what Doc Lewis turned into yesterday? He turned into a pancake. Now Little Mac is being cursed by the pancake disease. I don't know.
What?
This seems like a really intense fight.
Dude, what do you think about the thing
Right.
Afraid? Boo! Afraid? Boo!
It's on your face.
Everything you've done up to this point, Matt, comes down to this.
The funniest thing is when they have black eyes. It's fucking terrifying.
Oh.
Oopsies.
What are these camera angles?
Oh, I'm gonna get dizzy by watching this.
It's just like Cheween spins around.
Go on my flag.
Hey, you want some mo?
The unmatched power of the blood.
I like the voice actor behind Mr. Sandman.
Afraid.
Cool voice actor. I wonder who voice acted him. Sounds pretty cool.
Dude, where did you go?
You think I'm getting scared? Stop doing it.
This is so scary. This is a horror. This guy's face off. Decent autoplay. No way, Mr. No way, Mr. Salmon in a haunted house.
Ah! What is happening?
Oh, that's the red just flag.
The world ends. I can't get up.
Torment. Me when I'm browsing
Little Mac's officially dead. Mr. Sandman killed him.
Me after killing my opponent. It's the ultimate boxing move. Kill your opponent.
He's just
Okay.
He was so confused he just
Oh.
left the ring.
Oh.
Oh no. But yeah, let's start the stream off with something very silly again. Is the animations repeating or something? What the fuck is happening? That's just fucking crazy. Hi.
He's fainting. He's fainting. Oh my god. He's just fainting the swing.
These corruptions are insane.
Yeah?
I don't think he's okay. He just turned into a statue.
Okay.
He froze. He turned
Oh,
into
okay.
he turned into ice.
Oh,
Let's go, kid.
Back right.
Make the seconds
oh, yeah,
count.
he's going up.
Look. Look at
The camera.
His nerve ending got grabbed.
And then the voice says who wins.
Really? Really? Bruh. Don't do this to me, man.
Who won? I don't know.
Bruh, don't do this to me, man. No. No, 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 no. I get it. It costs 0 bits at the moment, but no. No, don't.
It's just this gameplay with the caption.
I think
God. Okay. Yeah, anger. I'm angry. He turned into Mike Tyson.
I agree, probably.
Look at his teeth. He got British teeth.
Yeah, that's actually one of the corruptions. It makes people British. It's the worst one. Hey, wanna know all the cheat codes? I got all the cheat codes. You can make Mr. Salmon Mike Tyson. You can also make him British.
Oh! The screen just turned into vomit. I can't tell what's going on.
That's not even pictures. Those are just shapes.
Oh, y'all probably can't hear it.
Well, you stood still, alright.
Missed me.
Goodbye.
I just realized y'all probably couldn't have heard the video. So I turned the gain up a little bit. Gain up, I meant desktop audio up a little bit.
Do not get hit.
Crunch, dude! Crunch time!
You should probably be 0.
Photo!
Oh shit, you're fighting on gold! Never, there,
I don't even know what I'm doing. Oh,
I fucking hate this guy. He's American, so I don't like him.
Crunch, no!
Which one? Star schools don't look like Call of Duty.
Crunch, focus! Crunch time! Photo! Oh!
why do I keep doing it so early?
Photo. This dude 100% lives in Florida. This is the most Florida man I've ever seen. California.
Crunch
California, hello. You're so kind. Nice, I guess. His eyes! Oh god!
That face,
Look
though.
at his eyes!
Just like,
Okay.
I think he lost his eye.
Isaac Stapler.
And Little Max
We're
a
gonna
statue as
die.
well.
Yo, bro, why you leaving me hanging?
Stay down. 1, 2, 3.
His eye was poked out when he wants to fight.
Hey, what's up with the...
Trembling in fear.
He does not want to look around. He does not want to turn around and look at his
It's just
flexing muscle.
terrifying.
Oh, that was bad.
No!
You just knocked him
No.
out. He's dead. He's
The
fucking
answer's no.
dead.
The pain.
Crunch, no!
You should just exit the menu with corruption still going and see what happens.
Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, that didn't work out well.
His screaming is very funny.
True.
Here it comes.
Ow!
The troll face.
He just went, huh? And just completely just missed.
When's he gonna swing, guys? Now this has gotta be bait. Don't be trolled, guys.
He's staring me down. He's looking right. Oh!
No.
Wait, what happened?
Fear.
Wait, what happened?
No. Fear.
Can you click this?
Mommy.
I gotta go back. What happened?
Now this has gotta be bait. Don't be trolled, guys.
He's staring me down. He's looking right. Oh!
No.
Oh,
Fear.
I think he's scared. I think he's scared the punch.
Mommy.
Did that?
The pain.
The unmatched power of having 3 stars.
The timer.
Ayo, wide time, wide time. No, wait, that's tall, not wide.
I just realized that guy came by and just. Ow! Fuck. That guy came by and just did one moan and one jump scare and left.
Holy shit.
Unless you're still here.
The camera.
I can't tell.
I don't like that.
Yeah, Disco Kid.
I will never. Okay, we crashed, but I can never unsee that. I literally cannot. I cannot unsee that. Dude, come on.
Why did it change pitch?
He's so happy he punched Little Mac in the face.
Yeah.
Kid.
Stand still. Oh.
I'm healing. Okay, hold on.
Oh Christ, he's a zombie.
He just lost his jaw.
Ow.
No more audience. No more shoulders.
They're just training guys.
Yeah, guys.
That's Little Mac
Now they're
and the
dead.
numbers right there.
Okay, yep, that guy that just left. I don't get why chatters do that. They just come by and be like, oh hey, what's up? They say one word, do one thing, and then they leave.
He has a sun
Like
in his
what?
mouth.
Am I not that entertaining?
Bitch to the screen.
No,
That's
I'm a very
interesting.
cute and funny and entertaining angel.
Ayo, Flapjack head.
I fucking love it when he says "ow." Just like,
Hey Ghosty, I bet your real name is Narcissus Prince.
what?
Damn, he's so crazy. He broke the game before the fight even fucking started.
Hold on, I'm gonna do this. Ah!
Little Ryan Mac.
Little Ryan
That
Mac.
triggered from that one zombie game. I forgot the name. One.
Oh, nice feel of you. Do
Thanks.
TF2 players be like? At least I can see.
Hey kid, they say
Ah!
boxing is fighting.
No,
My
boxing
Pringles-
is
We're
not
fighting
fighting. It's
Jacksepticeye.
war. And as we all know, war is not fighting.
Red, why do I not have you added?
Cause I'm in front of you.
Look at me, Mac. I got big muscles. Why would you date me? I love you.
You know what is funny? He's from Ireland.
The Irish.
Let's go.
Okay, where we going?
Like an Irish person.
Damn,
Somebody
it's
muted
not
the
boring
game
at all.
audio.
So this is how people upload music to YouTube.
He's just gone.
Corrupt. It just did it.
Oh
I
god,
broke
no.
your camera. Fuck you.
Thumbnail. The guy
Yes.
sounded like a pig.
This
Yellow. Yellow.
Who peed all over the screen?
Orange. Yellow. The world stands still.
I just
No way, staring contest. Real?
Nothing.
Big Mac. Big.
Oh, Big Mac.
That fucking face is hilarious.
Don't
He just
turtle
stares.
around,
He
Mac.
just stares
Come on.
insanely
The
into the
unmatched
camera.
power of the sun.
His legs.
I don't
Look
know.
at his legs. He's doing that little.
Oh god, maniac.
Hold up, muh! That's all I heard.
Oh.
What I hear? Oh!
It just sounds like they would
What's that
burst
noise?
his audio tank.
Oh my god,
Oh my god, he's speaking
the
to
voice is so bad.
Stop. A savage beating.
It
That
looks
must
like
not
he
be
had a
the
fucking
Yeah, upside down.
wound in the middle of his forehead for a second.
Thank you.
Spoon. Spoon, you're dying.
I know.
Glass.
Watch it out. You're right there.
Oh
It's gonna
my
get you.
god.
The death. It's hurt now.
Probably was a troll or
As in Twitch
chatter.
chat.
That would make sense.
Barbecue bacon burger.
Barbecue.
bacon burger.
Barbecue.
Barbecue bacon burger.
Barbecue.
Yes. What that is? Oh my god, look at his eyes. His eyes follow him, but he just
went
stands still.
Right back to that. Okay, now we're both. I freeze when I stop. Who you call
Outage
bitch?
1887.
Which one's that? Hold on.
Oh god.
And
Soda for Pinsky looks like he got fucking hit in the head with a hammer in a fucking Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Ha! Roasted.
Dude, that's such an accurate depiction.
Hey, Better, are you doing okay? Oh! Okay.
Hit 1 frame per second, it's like.
Yo!
I think you're just
He's jacking one off.
Fight!
The
Freezes.
camera. Nice. What?
This lets him take the hit.
No, he's doing it. He's doing it, guys. He's beating it. He's playing it. He's playing it. He's playing it. You're doing such a good job. Hey. Crimson.
Oh my god,
What
his
are you
eyes.
looking at?
That is pure fear. That's so scary. This is like turning the horror
You're not doing it
punch out.
Oh no! Fuck! I
What?
Bro, dude, I fucking wall again.
no
Yeah,
way, Kyle defense
no,
wall
he
gold.
You killed him.
Oh wait, never mind.
Oh my god.
They're
Why is the
fighting on
ground gold?
cheese.
I don't know.
No. You can do it.
No, I cannot.
Okay.
Ooh.
Ooh, he's got you there.
Oh, ooh.
Thanks.
He just
No,
punched the
corruption
he just punched
in
the screen
VR.
and then it crashed the game. He literally punched the game into oblivion.
Ha 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 ha.
Game's loud.
He's laughing at me.
Yeah.
A disaster. It's a disaster. Honestly,
I'm seeing a whole star on my screen.
Oh,
B-hop.
Why is there rice on my screen?
What the fuck? Okay, why is there a red?
That's what I would have
he's
said.
so shiny. He's like he's back in Blender. Oh.
Oh!
That was probably something funny, but I didn't
No
see
way,
it.
guys.
What?
Where's
Where's the
that?
particles from?
At what cost? I'm not thirsty.
Doesn't even let him get his drink.
Evil.
I'm gonna get you.
I'm B-hopping, go away.
This is the only game that does not look playable.
Dude, how did I just like sight read that? What the fuck?
But yeah. Okay, but yeah. Alright. Oh my god. Alright, so let's watch cool videos now. That one was not that good. All the other ones were more funnier than that. There wasn't that good faces compared to that. Okay, here's another weird one. Here's another. Here's another weird one. Tyler, the creator. Ha! I haven't heard his name in a long time.
Alright guys, so today's video is a suggestion
But yeah, this is
that
really
came from
interesting.
one of you guys, one of you told me that you wanted me to
Whoa.
cook ramen noodles in different liquids
YouTube don't
and
extra
see
shit.
if there was a liquid that was better than water. So
So you know how you cook your ramen noodles in water? Well, guess what? This guy is gonna be cooking them in different liquids,
actually, I
which
thought that
basically infuses them with infuses the ramen noodle, infuses the ramen noodles. Yeah, it infuses the ramen noodles with different
was
flavors
a
of liquid.
very, very bad idea, and it's probably not going to turn out good. So naturally, here we are. I already know, without even looking at anything, I know that the only liquid that you guys are concerned about is that you want me to cook these things in pickle juice. So that's going to be the one we do
Just like I
first.
told y'all yesterday,
I know
this is
every
a
single one of you
this
want.
is a trend on
These
his
are,
channel. He's gonna be cooking
kosher
ramen
dill
noodles
baby
and
bolts,
pickle
by the
juice.
way, if that means anything to you.
Also, Vlasic makes good pickles.
I think
Their
I got the
pickles are
wrong
like the
ones.
best.
I mean, pickles usually smell
Besides
These
kosher
smell-
deal.
like really, really strong. There is no way that these are gonna turn out good. Guess I'm gonna have to burn my hand off now. Isn't that wonderful? That's gonna be my next video. I'm gonna leave my hand in a jar full of something for 30 days. Now my favorite part, we get to boil the pickle juice, so that way the smell of pickle juice can just be steamed throughout the entire garage. And I'm sure it's gonna smell
Yes.
amazing in here.
Whoa, that was rough. I was trying to clear my throat at the same time. But I was trying to say, and yes, this guy does all of his projects and his videos in his garage. It's hilarious.
Alright, so after what feels like an eternity, our poison juice is boiling. And it smells disgusting in here, as you would imagine. It's like opening up the lid to a gas chamber or something. I'm going to be trying each liquid with just the noodles, and then I guess
Also,
just
this is
for
making
fun,
me
I'll
hungry.
throw in
I
the
want
chicken
some
flavor
ramen
after I
noodles
try
now.
just the plain noodles.
Like actually normal chicken flavor ramen
It's had
noodles.
3 minutes on the timer.
Ramen normals. Ramen noodles.
I don't know why it stopped boiling as soon as I took the lid off. I cannot. I don't know why I do this stuff. I can already tell this is going to be absolutely disgusting. I think maybe this is having a hard time boiling because the salt content, I think. Whatever 280 times 33, I don't know how much that is, but that's a lot of sodium, and that's how much is in one jar.
Oh,
So,
the salt
there's
is just
a ton
gonna
of
be
salt in there.
pure.
I feel like I'm cooking.
Oh, that's
I
terrible.
feel like I'm cooking my
Basically,
own last
all
meal
the
or
salt
something.
that's in the liquid is just gonna infuse
Just-
into the
there's
ramen
no way
noodles
this ends good.
with the pickles.
2, 1.
Oh, that's not good.
Oh, I'm so excited. Can't wait to taste these noodles. See what they taste like.
Tastes like
First
absolute
of all,
death,
They
possibly.
don't look any different than just regular noodles. They just look like they're regular ramen noodles that have been boiled. They have a... That is weird. I don't know if you can see that. They have like a very strange like slipperiness to them that normal noodles don't have. I should I should not have stuck my nose in there so far. Woo.
Bon appetito. Imagine it tastes. Imagine it tastes
Ooh.
like the ocean, because how salty
No.
it is.
No, I don't even know how to put that into words. I'm literally starting to sweat. It's like if you just took something. It tastes like where it's noodles. Okay, this is what it tastes like. Where it's noodles, it tastes like a slimy pickle. It tastes like if you took, which is basically what we did. If you took a pickle,
Slimy
and you, like,
pickle.
skinned it down into a noodle.
Oh.
You just put all of the.
Now that would be
nastiness
weird. That would
from
be
a pickle,
disgusting.
Then you put it into
That's
a noodle.
weird. Oh my
and then
god.
now you're like slurping this squirmy, slimy, like worm.
Did you really have to say
pickle
squirmy? Now that's
texture.
making it
It's-
worse. Come on.
It's absolutely disgusting.
You did not
If
have to say
somebody ever
squirmy.
tried
Come
this and
on,
they
man.
enjoyed it, they should be locked up because they are just a menace to society. Why not, just for
Okay.
fun, add a little bit of chicken flavor? Maybe that helps a little bit. I don't think there's anything that's going to be able to help this. This is just too far gone. Doing this should be like illegal. I'm gonna like go turn myself into the police station after this for committing such a crime. Yay! Here we go.
Get off my phone. God. There's like cat hair stuck to like the side of my phone. I don't like it.
I didn't bring a drink out here. It's a little bit better with the chicken flavor. Only because the chicken flavor kind of masks some of the disgustingness of the
Oh yeah.
cubes.
I
What we're
had a
gonna
great
end up with
breakfast this
is
morning.
like
I had leftover Bojangles from
like
yesterday.
a
It was delicious and it was
slimy
great.
worm
I
type
enjoyed
of
it. It was
texture
really
to the
great.
Noodle, but that has a now
But
has a
I'm gonna
very
have to cut
strong
down on doing
chicken
that
flavor.
because
Like,
eating
it's
out
a
every other
really
day is
weird
pretty
sensation,
unhealthy. You don't
and it's
want to
absolutely
intake that much
disgusting.
fast food.
I would not recommend it. Let's move on. All right, so let's get away from that.
Wait, what? Was that the pickle juice still?
It's a really weird sensation, and it's absolutely disgusting. I would not recommend it. Let's move on. All right, so let's get away from that pickled nastiness.
Okay.
And move on to something that I think actually
Making
has
sure,
the
making
potential
sure.
to be
I was
really
actually
good.
confused.
Surprisingly, iced tea. I think if we can get enough of
I love hanging
the
out with
iced
my
tea
feathers.
flavor to actually get into the
I
noodles,
like hanging out with
and then
my
with just
cute
a little
and
bit of chicken seasoning.
yeah, I like hanging
feel
out with
like
my
the
cute and funny.
combination of
Not
chicken,
funny, but I mean,
iced
yeah,
tea, I
true.
think really go together.
That too, but
So
I like hanging out with my cute and lovely feathers.
see how this does.
And I got good news. I'm about to hit affiliate. If I can just get an average of 3 viewers plus, if
This
I
is probably
can
gonna take
make that
forever to boil
stat,
since
if I
it's
can
cold.
hit 3, I'm in the affiliate. I'm in the
Alright,
affiliate
so
zone,
after-
boys.
what feels
I'm
like
in the
another
affiliate
eternity, we are
zone.
Finally boiling. This thing is trying
Just
to
one
boil
more
over.
stat, and I'm
The
hitting
steam
affiliate.
already got me. The sweet tea is turning out to be quite
I'm gonna
vicious.
definitely
3
plan a
minutes on
big.
the timer?
If I do, I'm planning a good.
It
I'm
smells
planning
good,
a big
though. This doesn't
celebration
smell
stream.
bad.
Maybe we'll do like a drinking stream or some shit. I don't know.
In we go. It almost
I'll
looks
tell y'all
like,
one thing. It doesn't take
almost kind
much
of
to
looks
get me
like
drunk.
frying oil.
Not
That's what
drunk,
I'm trying to say.
but
I don't know why that was so difficult.
it doesn't
to
take
get
me
out.
much to
gotta
feel a
start the
buzz,
timer.
to make me
3,
dizzy and shit a little bit.
2,
It doesn't take me much.
1.
It takes one tall 24-ounce
Yay.
can.
I actually
to
think
do it.
this is gonna be pretty good. It
One
smells
24-ounce
good.
Mike's
Let's
Harder
pull
will do
these
it.
bad boys out of here.
I don't know about y'all, but yeah.
Oh, don't fall apart on me now. Come on, you stayed together the entire cooking process, and then now you're gonna fall apart. At
But
the very
yeah.
end.
This time he cooked
Come on.
these ramen noodles in sweet tea. That
Don't be like that.
that actually doesn't
You
sound
guys
that
do me that
bad.
way.
That doesn't sound disgusting, actually. Compared to the other shit,
All right. That should
sweet
be enough.
tea flavored ramen noodles doesn't.
The sweet tea smell
Does
is kinda
not-
very,
does not
very
sound
faint.
that bad,
Again,
actually.
there's this like weird, like slipperiness.
You know
Maybe it
why?
was
Because
just the pickle
you're in a
juice.
paper
I
bowl.
don't know
That's
if
why.
maybe it's just been so long since I've had ramen noodles that, like, this is just something I wasn't aware of. But there's definitely like
It's
a
always like
slimy
that.
slipperiness there.
It's always like that. You can tell it's colored from the sweet tea.
You know what? I'm not gonna lie. That's actually pretty good. It has just it's not an overpowering sweet tea flavor. It's just a hint of sweet tea. I gotta try it with the chicken. I think this actually has the potential to be extremely good. Oh, come on.
Sweet tea with the chicken flavor. I don't know. I don't know. 07.
That is good.
Oh, it's
That is
good?
actually really good. That is,
Even with the
that is
chicken.
very, very good.
Even if the chicken flavoring.
The chicken
I might
flavor
actually
is
have
what
to try
stands
this
out first.
sometime.
So if you like chicken ramen noodles,
Not gonna
You're
lie, I
right,
might
yeah.
actually try this sometime.
but you taste that chicken flavor, and then on the back
As
end,
weird as that
you just
sounds,
taste
Apparently
the
it's that good.
slightest little hint of sweet tea with it. and it's not overpowering. It's not like aggressive. It's just right there. It's just a little hint of sweet tea. I would if I ate ramen noodles all the time, I would start doing this all the time. This is 10 out of 10. Let's move on. All right, so this next one is
That
coffee.
should just be a
I've already
recipe,
made
to
the
be
coffee,
honest.
Put it in this pot.
Sweet tea flavored
and now
ramen
we're just gonna
noodles.
have to bring it back up to a boil.
A mini recipe.
I am completely undecided on how I think this one is gonna do. For some reason, there's one part of me that says there's like a really weird part of me that says that this could be good, but like deep in my gut, I feel like this is just gonna be
Okay, what is it?
So, we'll see. The coffee is finally boiling. I don't know why it took so long. It
Coffee.
took 20 minutes.
Oh, that's
for this to boil.
no.
And then for some reason,
No,
I had to
Wait, why are you trying coffee? Coffee is bitter. If you don't add anything to it, coffee is completely bitter. Oh, he's gonna be in for a trip.
Put on, and it like as soon as you put the lid on, or as soon when I had the lid on, it would like bubble up real bad, and as soon as I take the lid off, all the bubbles will just go away. And then put the lid on, and then it tries to like bubble over. So I don't know what that's about. It smells really good in the garage though. Way better than that nasty pickle juice. Why did that sound so thick? You hear that? It even takes a while for it to like come back up to the top. I'm really curious to see if this is gonna be just flat out disgusting or if it like actually won't be that bad. Oh, here we go. Let's see if we can get these out of here in one go.
So, what?
Come on. There we go.
Okay, I can't fucking type.
Oh, that was actually smooth.
Fucking
So
excuse
after
me.
cooking them, these actually like absorbed a lot of the color from the coffee. I kind of thought that maybe the sweet tea would kind of give them this color where it's, you know, kind of the same shade of dark, but I guess really stained the noodles is probably what it did. I don't really, there's not too much of a coffee smell. It's there, it's faint, but like if I smell like from the pot, it doesn't smell nearly as strong as coming from the pot.
Okay, I just ended up voice typing that because I was sick and tired of the fucking bullshit.
No.
What'd you think was gonna happen? It's coffee. Plus, you can burn coffee and make it taste burnt. Plus, you boiled it, which you basically burned the coffee. So not only did he not flavor it, he just used plain old bitter normal coffee. He burned it. He burned it. He burned it.
That is a no-go. It's like there's I need
Sorry.
something to like wash out my tongue or something.
Whoa.
That's almost as bad as the pickles. It smells good. It doesn't smell as bad as the pickles, but as soon as you like put it on your tongue, it's almost like there's some type of like acid that's like eating your tongue or something. Just because I did it before, I'll add the chicken flavor and try again. As much as I hate to say it, this actually could be worse than the pickles. Okay, this might sound really weird, but for some reason, as soon as I smelled this, with the chicken and the coffee smell, the smell instantly reminded me of Captain D's fish. I don't know why. I don't know what that says.
I've never been to a Captain
fish,
D's, so I
but
wouldn't
that's
know.
exactly that was the first thing I thought of as soon as I smelled it.
I wouldn't know,
Very
to be
strange.
honest. I wouldn't know.
Nope. Nope.
Wow.
The chicken seasoning is like a multiplier. It's like
Of
a multiplier.
course.
It was already bad and bitter to begin with. Then you add the chicken seasoning on top of that. It's like extra salty with like more nastiness.
Me watching all this
mixed
food
in,
shit is
and
getting me
it's,
hungry.
like,
I'm gonna have to
the,
go get me something else to eat
acid
downstairs.
effect is almost like intensified. Absolutely disgusting. 0 out of 10. Do not do that. All right, next up, since we are kind of in the morning time beverage space with the coffee, next we're gonna try some Monster Energy. Maybe Monster will be a really great addition to the noodles, and maybe we can make some like morning time noodles so you can get your caffeine and your ramen noodle intake all in one. I don't think this is gonna be good. Monster has a very, very odd flavor. You know, you can kind of like taste different things and imagine the flavors together. I don't think these flavors are gonna mix. And I also forgot that Monster looks like very dehydrated urine. It's always very appetizing. All right, let's kick this thing on. We'll come back when it's boiling. So I guess Monster just, for some reason, doesn't get to a rolling boil like the other liquids do. This is, I mean, it's been a good amount of time, and this is about as far as it's got. The combination of smells in here, it smells like just like a really dirty movie theater. I don't know why that's the smell that comes to mind. Just imagine an extremely old, really old, dirty movie theater. That's what it smells like. Oh, I didn't set the timer. Alright, let's let this monstrosity cook. Oh, it still looks like it's carbonated, kind of. I figured the heat would have released all of the carbonation. Alrighty. Scoop these bad boys out of here. Oh, we're gonna get it all in one scoop again? Oh. Oh, look at me go. Look at me go. I'm a professional ramen noodle cooker at this point. Surprisingly, these really didn't get any type of like color or anything. They just look like they've been boiled in regular water. They do smell bad though.
Shit. I mean, of course, it doesn't sound good. And also, I noticed that the noodles have a little bit of a tan to them. But they basically look normal. But
Ew. I don't know how to process that. The texture on these, I guess where maybe there's like so much sugar and like maybe like other stuff inside of the Monster, the noodles have
also,
this,
I'll be right
like,
back. Let me go use the restroom.
like really like slime.
Okay, I'm back.
Not so much slimy, more like a super like sticky, tacky
Whoa.
flavor, or not flavor, but like
Have to
texture.
deal with
Almost
fucking
as if
bullshit
you're eating
again.
kind of like a half gummy candy sort of.
Can
I
you
don't even know how to describe.
Okay, but of course I have to deal with bullshit again. Of course, I went to go use the restroom, then I went to go downstairs to get me some Hot Pockets, right? Well, guess what? Of course I'm bullied again, and I'm fucking verbally abused again. And then they get mad at me when I try to defend myself. No, I'm clearly in the right here. Whatever. I can never have a peaceful day. All I'm just gonna say this, y'all, is I can't wait when they move out. Just a few more days. I can't wait. And then they move out, I'm gonna be happy. And nothing's gonna go wrong. Then my life is gonna start to get better. And then I can be able to cuddle. Then I can be able to cuddle and enjoy streams peacefully with my feathers without any interruptions, nothing. But yeah, I got me like 2 like cheese, pepperoni like Hot Pockets. It's pretty nice. But yeah. I haven't had Hot Pockets in like a good minute. But anyway, let's continue.
Describe it, but that distinct monster flavor, like that kind of weird tangy flavor that monster has.
And I wish
it's just like a noodle with
everybody
just
can just
tiny
leave already.
hint of that like weird tangy flavor. It's not good. it's not horrible. It's not. I've had worse, but it's not good. The chicken flavor can kind of, I don't know, bring something out of it. How they're kind of like all sticking together. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. That was I've never tasted anything like that before in my life. I said it kind of smells like an old movie theater in here. Now picture that movie theater, but you know how like you go into a movie theater and whenever you're walking, it's like on the floor because it's all sticky. If you licked that floor, that's what this tastes like. It's disgusting. For our last drink, we are going to go with some old-fashioned Coca-Cola. This is another one that I'm torn on. I don't know. It's 50-50. Has the potential to be good, but also has the potential to be completely disgusting. I guess we'll just have to just figure it out. I'll be the human guinea pig, so that way you guys don't have to do it for yourself. All right, that should be enough. Jeez. So I'm beginning to think that maybe stuff that has a very high sugar content isn't gonna boil like water would, because the Coke and the Monster both have a lot of sugar, and neither one of them will actually get to like a rolling boil. Put this bad boy in here. This one's kind of like the Monster. Oh, start the timer. It's kind of still, even though it's like boiling temperature, it still acts like it still has a little bit of carbonation left in it. I'm really, really curious to see if it's gonna pick up some of this Coke flavor and be like super, super dark. 3, 2, 1. Alright, here we go. Coke flavored ramen noodles. It looks like they did pick up a good amount of that color. For what it's worth.
Coke flavored ramen noodles.
Man.
That actually might be good.
You don't have to play these games. You're gonna get Coke everywhere. It's gonna
Monster
be
Energy was
sticky.
terrible.
They don't really have too much of a smell. They just kind of smell like just regular noodles. Let's see what
It's
it did for the
colored like
flavor.
it's colored like Coca-Cola, that's for sure.
I don't know what to make of that. It's kind of bland. Like there's a little bit of a Coke flavor, but it's not really strong enough to really really affect anything. I don't know. It's just it's not bad, but it's also just not good. It's just kind of there.
Okay.
Maybe the
It's been a lonely
chicken
stream.
flavoring
There's
will
like
kinda-
hardly no one coming to my stream today.
I don't know. Bring
But
out the
I don't
Coke
mind.
flavor.
I'm just having fun and being my cute and
Ugh.
comfy self.
Please don't be bad. Please
And
don't
enjoying
be bad.
watching TylerTube, one of my
I've
favorite
tried so many
creators.
bad things today. Please be halfway decent. That like sticky, like weird texture that the monster had, it doesn't have that. So it must have not just been sugar. It must have been there's something else in the monster that caused that to happen. It's really, especially once you put the chicken seasoning on there, the Coke flavor, it's still there, but it's very, very faint. So faint that if you just gave me these noodles and you didn't tell me that they were boiled in Coke, I probably wouldn't taste it. I feel like the only reason that I can taste it and I pick up on it slightly eating there is because I know that I boiled these in Coke. Take it or leave it.
Now I'm
not
having
gonna go out
bad
of my way
anxiety
to
because of
boil ramen
today.
noodles in Coke. They don't add enough of an
It's
extra
kind of
flavor.
sad that
They're just,
almost
like
every
I said,
single
they're
day
just kind of there. That's
there's
gonna
always
be
something
our
that happens when I go
last
downstairs
ramen
now.
noodle
Like,
concoction for the
I
day.
don't get along
If
with
you've
my
learned
mom ever
anything from this video,
anymore.
we've learned that
Like,
everybody
it's at an
should
all-time
be
low.
making their ramen noodles with sweet tea because this was absolutely the best one, the
I just
best
wish we could
combination,
get along, but we just
and it's
can't.
definitely better than just plain old water. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Whatever. That title, though. Okay, I want to show y'all this. This is interesting. Whoa.
In theory,
Whoa.
it should be.
This guy's
This
named Now
video
Red,
has been
and
sponsored
he's
by
a
Micro
chemist,
Center.
and he's so cool.
About a year ago, I turned plastic gloves into grape soda, and now I want to try turning them into hot sauce. This is something I've been wanting to do
This
almost
is one of
since
my
this
most
channel
favorite
started,
videos.
and in theory,
He turns plastic
it
gloves
should be possible.
using
Just because
chemistry
plastic
into hot
gloves,
sauce.
specifically vinyl ones,
I like
can sometimes
watching this
contain
guy.
a
Now
chemical
Red is also a
called
cool guy.
DINP. It's used to make the gloves more durable, softer, and
Now getting
malleable,
all scientific on stream
but
right
I don't
now.
really care about any of that. All I care about is that it
I like
looks
how his
vaguely similar
splash
to this,
logo is covered by
which is a
art
naturally
like
occurring
2Ks.
chemical that gives chili peppers their spiciness. These long tails in particular are almost exactly the same, and they were what I was most interested in. This was because I felt that it was possible
But yeah,
to
this
pluck
is
them off the
interesting,
DINP
and I want to show you all this.
and to then use
I
them
love
as a
watching this
starting
video. I
point
like rewatching
to
it.
build
It's
the
nice.
spicy molecule. Based on this, in my opinion, the general idea that it came up with was relatively simple. I first had to find some gloves that contained DINP. I could then extract it and turn it into pure spiciness, and then I could use that to make some hot sauce. The only issue was that this would be by far the biggest project I'd ever attempted. I also wasn't exactly sure how to do it, or if it would actually work, and there was a decent chance that it would be a total failure. But anyway, to get started, we first have to go back to when I turned plastic gloves into grape soda. This is because this hot sauce project actually kind of started at the exact same time. So now, this was almost 2 years ago, and I was about to start making my grape soda. I had a nice box of plastic gloves, and I started by pulling out about 20 of them. For this project, the gloves that I used were also vinyl, and I chopped them into smaller pieces. When I was done, I put it on a hot plate, and I added just enough rubbing alcohol to cover them. On top of this, I put a bowl filled with cold water, and I turned on the hot plate. After that, I waited for the alcohol to start boiling, and I was doing this to extract something called a phthalate. And the reason that I wanted the phthalate was because it was very close to the main chemical that gives grape Kool-Aid its flavor. There were many types of phthalates, though, and I really didn't care which one I had because it really didn't
yeah,
matter.
This is
It could
really
have been
interesting.
any of the several that were commonly used in vinyl gloves, like DEHP, DBP, or DNOP. Just by complete chance,
But yeah,
though, these
I'm
were
having
the only
I'm-
gloves
but-
that I could
but
find,
yeah, I'm having
and they
fun and having a
contained
chill time.
diisononyl phthalate,
Oh,
or
it's all right,
DINP
Kirumi.
for
Thanks
short.
for dropping by.
After about an hour, it
You
was
should
ready,
honestly try to get
and
more
all
sleep.
of the DINP should have
You don't have to
dissolved
come
into
by
the
if you don't
alcohol.
want to. If you're too
What I
tired,
had to do
it's
next was
totally
get rid of all the
understandable.
leftover
I understand,
plastic,
but thanks
so
for
I
coming
poured it
by.
into a funnel
We are
that was
watching
plugged with some
a
cotton.
guy named Nara Red right now turn plastic gloves into hot sauce using chemistry.
When this was done,
It's, and
I
yes,
was
it's
left with a
possible.
solution of
It's
DINP,
possible.
and I concentrated it
Wait,
by
you watch him?
evaporating off half the alcohol.
Yes, I like
This
Nara
ended
Red.
up taking
He's
about
really
an hour,
cool.
but what I was left with
I
was
started
still a bit
watching him
cloudy,
like last year.
so I had to
Not
filter
last year,
it
but
again.
like
I
a
did
couple
the
years
exact
ago,
same thing where I just
and
poured
he's
it
really
through some
cool. I
cotton,
like him.
and when it was eventually done, it was looking a lot cleaner. What I had now was a nice and clear solution
Yeah, he
of
turned
DINP,
these
what I
plastic
did
gloves
next
into grape
was add
soda.
a concentrated
But now he's
solution
turning these
of
plastic
sodium
gloves
hydroxide
into hot
drain
sauce,
cleaner.
which is really interesting.
This started reacting almost immediately with the DINP, and it was slicing off its tails. Now on their own, the tails were becoming something called isononanol, and the rest of the molecule was turning into sodium phthalate. To fully complete the reaction, though,
That
I
looks
had
like
to boil
piss.
it for a while,
It looks like
and
some
when
type
it was
of
done,
pee.
I
Not gonna
poured
lie.
it all into a separatory funnel.
But it looks like pee. Oh, now it actually does now.
This quickly separated into two layers.
Who knows? That
and
might have
for
been
the
me.
grape project,
That might have been. I
I
might have.
wanted the bottom
might have
one because it
took a pee in
contained
there.
all of the sodium phthalate. So I drained it all out into a beaker.
Oh yeah. I
and
haven't
I
seen that one
continued
yet.
on with that mission.
I haven't seen that one yet. But it
Left
does look.
behind,
The
though,
thumbnail
was
by
a
the
bunch of
thumbnail of it
yellow
looks very
liquid.
interesting.
Which was mostly rubbing alcohol. However, it also contained all of the isononanol tails, and this was where my hot sauce adventure began. Or, I mean, where it technically began, because I didn't actually end up touching any of this for over a year. This is mostly because it took me that long to
Yeah,
get the
go get
courage
yourself
to
some
attempt
more
this
sleep, hun.
project. One
You
day,
do your
though,
best to
I
visit my stream
randomly
almost
decided
every
that I was ready
time,
to commit
and
to it.
and
and I
you do your
just
best
got
to be a good
started.
moderator.
The
You
first
work
thing that I
hard,
had to do
so
was find
go get
all
yourself
of
some
that
sleep.
yellow juice
Thanks
that
for
I
dropping
made,
by.
which was actually 5 jars, and not just one.
But yeah, thank
This
you.
was because I ended up needing a lot more sodium
But
phthalate
yeah, I'm just
for
gonna
the
be
grape flavor, and I
Oh,
had to
watching
repeat
cool
the same
videos
extraction
and
4
just
more
eating hot-
times
and
on a
eating my
total
hot
of
pockets.
100 gloves.
Because
But
I'm
either
hungry
way,
and
all
I
this
can't
meant
make it
was
too
that I
much.
now had a bunch more of it, and
I
what I,
gotta
had to do
eat.
next was pull out all of the isononanol that was in here. Then, once I had it isolated, I could start building it into my spicy
I'm gonna wash my
molecule
hands. I'll be right back.
called
I'll leave the video playing for y'all.
nordihydrocapsaicin. But with that being said, to get the isononanol, it was relatively simple, and I was just gonna have to distill it. So, to get started, I poured everything into a large flask. After that, I dropped in a stir bar, and above the flask, I added a short path condenser and a thermometer. I then attached some water lines to cool the condenser, and I also added a heating mantle.
My VR
The
headset's
beaker was
charged.
there to collect everything that distilled over, and when I felt that
I
I was
might go on
ready,
VR after
I
this,
turned on
when
the
I'm done with
heating.
streaming.
It wasn't too long before hot vapor started climbing out of the flask, and it eventually made it to the condenser. This was
I'll
turning
put
it
the
from a vapor
microphone
back
right
into
up.
a liquid,
Actually,
and
too
it
close to the
started
speakers.
dripping into the beaker.
I'll put the microphone
What I
right
was
here.
collecting here was the
Something
isopropyl
they
rubbing
couldn't
alcohol that I had originally used to extract the DINP. The goal here was to
Make room
distill
on my
over all
desk.
of it, and left behind should have been just the isononanol.
This angel's
So,
gonna fill her
I was
her
just gonna
small
have to
tummy
wait
with-
for it all to make it over,
with
and
hot pockets.
unfortunately, it was gonna take a while.
That's good. That's actually really
It
good.
ended up taking even longer than I expected, and it took 4 hours
Okay,
to
this
collect
one doesn't
about
have
800
pepperoni.
mils.
The normal ones I eat
I then swapped
is
it out for a
pepperoni
new
pizza hot
beaker,
pockets. Those are the ones
and
I
I
like better.
continued waiting.
These are good though.
It was only after another 2 hours that it was finally looking like it was close to being done. However, I then saw something that I didn't like. The liquid that was coming over had become cloudy, and this meant that there was water in it. And this was a problem because there was still way too much liquid in the flask. This told me that most of it was just water, and I had to stop the distillation. I then had to wait for it to cool down, and when it was only slightly warm, I poured it all into a separatory funnel. The stuff that I had now
No, that looks
looked
like,
a lot thicker and goopier than before,
that
and by
kind
the
of looks like
time I was
peach.
done adding it,
Like a type of
I
peach.
could already see some
drink.
water separating out.
I don't know.
I then let it sit there for about half an hour, and I waited for it to fully separate. When it eventually looked like it was done, I opened the valve, and I drained it all out.
But yeah, really interesting.
Left in the funnel should have been mostly isononanol, and I poured all of it back into a flask. It was all still really dirty and orange, though, and I was gonna have to clean it up. To do this, I'd have to do another distillation, and I put together almost the exact same setup as before. I then waited, and over the next 15 minutes,
Now it's like a
it
neon
eventually
orange.
started boiling. Then not too long after this, something started coming over, and it was just water. The temperature then slowly started rising, and I started collecting some other weird oily junk. Eventually, though, the temperature stopped rising when it got to 205°C, and this was the boiling point of isononanol. The fact that it stopped here was a nice confirmation that I did in fact have isononanol, and I swapped out the beaker. What was coming over now looked really nice and clean, and I kept collecting it
Nice and
until
clear
it got to
isononanol.
208°C. At this point, the distillation was done, and I now had a bunch of fresh isononanol. In total, it was about 97 grams, and it was almost exactly how much I was hoping to get. It was also way more than I needed,
Perfect.
which was nice, because it meant that I could screw up a lot and still be okay. But anyway, with that being said, I could finally start trying to build my spicy molecule, and the first step was to convert this isononanol into isononanoic acid. I wasn't exactly sure how to do this, but the first idea that I came up with was to use something called potassium permanganate. This was because I had already used it a few years ago to do a very similar reaction. I turned butanol into butanoic acid, which smells like vomit, and I figured I could just almost do the same thing. However, long story short, it didn't work at all. I tried many times, but it was always a complete and utter failure. So I was going to have to come up with another way, and I started thinking that something called Jones reagent might work. It was also pretty much the only other option that I had, and I decided to try it out. To get started, the first step was to make the Jones reagent, and I added 22 mils of water to a beaker. I then added 15.4 grams of chromium trioxide, and I stirred it until it all dissolved. When it was all gone, I moved it to an ice bath, and I waited for it to get nice and cold. When it eventually got to around 5°C, I started adding concentrated sulfuric acid. Every time it was added, though, it generated a lot of heat, and I had to do it in small portions. I also had to keep the temperature below 10°C, and it took about an hour to add everything. When it was finally done, I poured in some ice-cold water, and at this point, the Jones reagent was ready. I didn't need it right at this moment, though, so I just let it chill here for a bit. I then went and got another beaker, and into this, I added 350 mils of acetone. This was going to be the solvent for the reaction, and for now, the only other thing that I had to add was 5 grams of my fresh isononanol. I then turned on the stirring, and when it had all dissolved, I moved it to an ice bath, and I added a thermometer. I was also going to have to wait for this to cool down, and I left it here for about half an hour. When I came back to it, the temperature was around 5°C, and what I had to do next was start adding the Jones reagent. After it was added, it slowly changed color, and this was because the chromium in the Jones reagent was getting reduced. This was a very good sign that it was reacting with the isononanol, and hopefully, it was turning it into the isononanoic acid. The goal here was to eventually add all of the Jones reagent, but I had to do it really slowly. This was because every time that I added it, the temperature would increase, and to prevent side products, I had to keep it below 5C. So I just kept
It's changing
adding it
into some
slowly
nice
and
colors, though.
carefully, and at some point it stopped changing colors and kind of just stayed a brownish orange. This was happening because the Jones reagent was starting to build up, and this told me that most of the isononanol had probably reacted. In total, it took about 3 hours to add everything, and now I had to just let it stir for a while. About 2 hours later, it looked almost the same, and at this point, it should have been done. What I had to do next was destroy all of that extra Jones reagent, and this was thankfully pretty simple. All I had to do was add some isopropyl rubbing alcohol. This would quickly react with it and turn into acetone, which was the same as the reaction solvent. At first, I was adding it only a bit at a time because I didn't want to add too much. I eventually kind of gave up though, and I just dumped in a whole bunch. This quickly caused the color to change to a really nice blue. I then let it stir like this for about 30 minutes to really make sure that all of the Jones reagent was destroyed. When I came back to it, it looked pretty much the same, and the next thing I had to do was filter it. To do this, I poured it into a funnel with cotton and sea light, and I waited for it to slowly pass through. This actually ended up going somewhat quickly, and I was eventually left with a nice and clear solution. Left in the funnel was a bunch of dark blue chromium salts, and this was all waste. But anyway, what I had to do next was get rid of most of the acetone. So I put it on a hot plate, dropped in a stir bar, and cranked up the heating. I also set up a fan to blow on it to make it go faster, but it still took about 6 hours for most of it to disappear. When I eventually felt like I'd gotten rid of enough, I poured it all into a separatory funnel. On top of this, I added a bunch of distilled water to dilute it. Then I added a solvent called dichloromethane,
Kind of looks like a light
or
blue, like
DCM
Gatorade,
for
but
short.
color.
It wasn't able to mix with the water though, and it quickly sank to the bottom as a separate layer. With everything added, I took it off the stand, and I started shaking it around. I was doing this to really mix things up, and when I felt that it was enough, I put it back on the stand. As it sat there, the layers separated again, and all the DCM sank to the bottom. Now, assuming that I actually made any isononanoic acid, it should have been dissolved in the DCM. So, I drained it all out into a beaker. Everything that was left in the funnel should have been mostly water and sulfuric acid. There still might have been some isononanoic acid though, so I added some more DCM to it, and I extracted it a few more times. After every extraction, I drained the dichloromethane into the same beaker, and I eventually had a bunch of cloudy liquid. It was all cloudy because it was full of water, and before moving on, I was gonna have to dry it. So, I poured it into another separatory funnel. I then added some saturated salt water, which would pull out most of the water. I then shook it
Why
around,
did that hurt when I
and when the layers
adjusted
eventually
myself from my seat? Why
separated,
did that hurt?
it was
What?
looking pretty good.
Hell was
The
that
only
about?
tricky part
Stomach?
here was that the DCM was no longer the lower layer, and it was now the upper one. The bottom one was the salt water that I had added, and I drained it all away. I then poured everything into a beaker, and unfortunately, it was still a bit cloudy. So I turned on the stirring, and I added some anhydrous sodium sulfate to dry it even more. I let this stir for a while, and when I felt that it was done, I poured it all into another flask. The next step was to get rid of all the DCM, and I had to do another distillation. This went relatively quickly, and after a while, all that was left was a thick oil. This was all hopefully isononanoic acid, but I don't think it was very pure, and I was gonna have to clean it up. So I stopped the distillation, and when everything had cooled down,
It doesn't look that
I
clean.
transferred
It's got
all
like
of
a
it to
yellow
a much
tinge to
smaller
it.
flask. I then attempted to distill it, but for some reason, it absolutely refused to work. Instead, it just bubbled and frothed, and after several hours of trying, it was still a complete failure. It was at this point that I really started worrying that I might have been stuck. I still had no idea how much of this was actually isononanoic acid, and it was going to be a big problem if I couldn't purify it. There was still hope, though, because there was one other thing that I thought might work. So I got out a beaker, and I added 50 mils of distilled water.
Alright, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back.
Then into this,
Didn't take
I
that long.
shot in all of my
Now I'm
goofy
gonna finish
liquid.
my early lunch off with some
It all just
barbecue
quickly floated to the
Lay's
top,
potato
and I
chips.
turned on the stirring. As an oil, it didn't at all mix with the water, but then I started adding a solution of sodium hydroxide drain cleaner. This was a very strong base, and if I did actually have isononanoic acid, it should react and turn into a water-soluble form. As I kept adding it, the oil slowly disappeared, and I was really happy to see this. This didn't fully confirm that this was isononanoic acid, but it was pretty good evidence. Even after adding a lot of base, though, it was still a bit cloudy, so I added a bunch more. However, this didn't really seem to do anything, and this was because there was some sort of impurity. I was going to have to get rid of it, and to do this, I was going to have to put it back into a separatory funnel. I then added a different solvent called hexanes, which would dissolve most of the impurities. After shaking it around, I drained out the lower layer, and I threw away the hexanes. I then put the lower layer back into the funnel, and I washed it a couple more times with hexanes. This would hopefully get rid of most of the side products, and any other junk that might be in there. When I was eventually done with that, it was time for the moment of truth. I had to add some dilute acid, and this would immediately tell me if everything had worked. I was pretty sure that it had, but I was also completely prepared to be disappointed. So I just dumped it all in, and it almost immediately turned everything white, which I was extremely happy to see. This was all isononanoic acid being regenerated, and it was going back to being insoluble in water. I then again added some hexanes, but this time, it would actually dissolve the isononanoic acid. I then shook it around, and I waited for the layers to separate. However, now, it was the hexanes part that I wanted. So, I drained away the lower one, and I dumped all the hexanes into a beaker. I then did the same extraction a few more times, and I combined everything. When I was done, I added some sodium sulfate to dry it, and I stirred it for several minutes. Now, all I had to do was get rid of the hexanes. So, I poured it all into a flask, and I did what felt like the billionth distillation. This thankfully didn't take very long, though, and about an hour later,
I bet.
it looked like all the hexanes were gone. I then let it cool down, and I transferred it all to a small vial. My final yield here was 3.5 grams of nearly pure isononanoic acid, and this was pretty much the perfect amount. Okay, so now, after a week or so of pain, I had the first major piece of my spicy molecule. This was only half of it though, and getting this was also kind of the easy part. The hard part was going to be actually building it into the spicy molecule that I wanted, called nor-dihydrocapsaicin. This was mostly because I started this project without even knowing how I was going to do it. I mean, I had a few basic ideas, but nothing really concrete. By the time that I got to this point, though, I realized that there was only one decent way. I was going to have to build the entire other half separately, and then add it onto the isononanoic acid. Normally, this wouldn't be too bad, but in this case, not only was I unsure how to make it, I was kind of unsure how to add it. The only thing that I knew was that the chemical that I needed looked oddly similar to something called vanillin. Which is the
Alright, I'm
major
back.
flavor
I
component
got
of
me
vanilla.
one more drink, and that
So now,
is a good early
I
lunch.
had to update the plan for the
This
project.
angel is full.
I was gonna have to get my hands on some vanillin and turn it into something called vanillylamine. I could then add this to my isononanoic acid to make the beautiful and spicy nor-dihydrocapsaicin. So I guess now I would be technically turning plastic gloves and vanilla into hot sauce, which I honestly think is even weirder. I mean, it all makes sense on paper, but I still find it really hard to believe that these two completely unrelated things can be combined to make spiciness. But anyway, to get started, the first thing that I had
really
to do
interesting, right?
was get some vanillin. From past experience, I found that the best and easiest source was vanilla sugar, and I found a bunch of it at a grocery store. I wasn't exactly sure how many to get, but I figured that 18 was a decent amount. I then started cutting them all open and dumping them into a beaker.
I
In
bet it
total,
smells really,
this was
really
gonna
good.
give me
since
a
it's
bit
vanilla
over
sugar.
300 grams of vanilla
I
sugar,
bet it smells
and it
lovely.
only took a few minutes to empty everything. When all of them were eventually added, I started pouring in some methanol, and I added just enough to cover it. In total, this ended up being about 300 mils, and then I started mixing it. What I was trying to do here was selectively dissolve the vanillin, which was kind of just mixed into a bunch of sugar. The sugar itself was practically insoluble in methanol, and pretty much all of it should be left behind. But anyway, I then let it sit there for about 30 minutes to really make sure that I dissolved as much vanillin as possible. When I came back, it looked pretty much the same, and what I had to do next was separate the methanol. To do this, I was going to have to filter it, and I scooped it all into my vacuum filter. When it was all eventually added, I washed the beaker with some extra methanol, and I mixed it around a bit. I then turned on my vacuum pump, and I
I
pulled
think this
all
is
the
very
methanol
satisfying seeing the
into a
vacuum pump
flask below
work
the
its
filter.
magic.
To really make sure that I got out all the
Because all
vanillin,
this does is
I
like
washed
pull
the
it to the
sugar
filter
a
and
couple
suck
more
all the
times
water
with
out,
methanol,
but it keeps like
and that
the
was
sugar
basically it.
and all the solid stuff
The only
behind.
issue was that some of the
It's
sugar
so
had made it
satisfying. I
through,
like watching this.
and it made things a bit cloudy. This was relatively easy to fix, though, and I just filtered it again through some cotton and sea light. It was kind of slow, but what came through was a lot better, and it was almost crystal clear. What I had
Crystal clear
now
with a
was
hint
a
of yellow,
relatively
I'd say.
clean-looking solution, and what I had to do next was get rid of all the methanol. In theory, assuming it's actually in there, this should leave me with relatively pure vanillin. So I turned on the stirring and the heating, and I waited for it to warm up. Over the next 2 hours, the methanol slowly disappeared, and when there was only about 200 mils left, I transferred it to a smaller beaker. I then just waited again, and when it eventually got down to about 25 mils, I transferred it to an even smaller beaker. At this point, there really wasn't very much methanol left, and when it eventually got to around 10 mils, it looked like it stopped decreasing. So I pulled it off the hot plate, and I waited for it to cool down. As it was cooling, I was really hoping that it would solidify, but it apparently stayed as a liquid, and it looked like it separated into layers. This was a bit odd, but to fix it, I decided to try stirring it around and scraping the sides of the beaker. This can sometimes get things to crystallize, and at first, it really didn't look like it was working. However, I started seeing some little white bits, and then a whole bunch of solid stuff started appearing. This was all vanillin, and it looked like there was a decent amount. I kept stirring it for a couple minutes, but it still didn't look like everything had precipitated. There was probably still some methanol there, keeping it dissolved, so I added some water to force it out. This actually seemed to work pretty well, so
It
just
looks
for
like
good
some type
measure,
of baby
I added a
food
few
now.
more mils,
Like
and that
mashed
was
baby
about
food.
it. What I had now was a bunch of wet vanillin, but I wanted a nice powder, so I transferred it all to a vacuum filter. When everything was in there, I turned on my vacuum pump, and I pulled away the water. I then mixed it around a bit, and I was starting to see the powder that I wanted. It was still contaminated with methanol and sugar, though, so I added some cold water to wash it. After mixing it around and pulling away the water, it was already looking a lot better. Just for good measure, I washed it a few more times, and when I was done, I dumped it all into a small dish. I was really happy with what I had so far, but it was still kind of wet,
Need to dry
and I
it.
was gonna have to dry it.
Yeah, there you go.
So, I put it into a small desiccator. I left it there for a couple days, and when I eventually opened it up, I was hit with the really nice smell of vanilla. What I had now was nearly pure vanillin, and I had about 3.6 grams of it. The only
If
issue
I remember
was
correctly,
that this was going to be just
then he has to
barely
convert
enough
this
for
to
what I had to do,
vanilloxime.
and unlike with the isononanol, I didn't have much room to screw up. But anyway, now that I had the vanillin, I could try turning it
Vanillinoxime.
into the vanillamine, and the
Oh,
first
amine.
step was to make something called vanillinoxime. To
Okay,
do
I was
this,
right.
I got a
Vanillin
beaker,
oxime.
and I added
I was right.
1.81 grams
He
of
has to convert
something
it to
called
that.
hydroxylamine hydrochloride and 6.44 grams of sodium acetate trihydrate. On top of this, I poured in 25 mils of water, and I stirred it until it all dissolved. Then into the solution, I dumped in all of the vanillin.
Sodium
As
hydroxide.
it sat there, the vanillin slowly
cleaner?
mixed into the
I can't
water,
remember.
but I don't think much of it
I
actually
wasn't paying
dissolved.
attention. Shit.
This is because vanillin is almost insoluble in room temperature
As y'all
water,
can see, my
and
88.
I was gonna
as
have
you
to
can
heat
see
it up.
that ADHD
So I
is
covered
starting
the beaker
to show.
with a small watch glass, and I turned on the hot plate. Over the next 10 minutes, it slowly got hotter and hotter, but it
For
didn't look like too
ADD?
much was
I
happening.
can't remember.
That apparently
It's something
changed
to do
though
with
when it
me
eventually
not
got
paying
hot
attention.
enough, and all of the vanillin quickly disappeared. I then continued heating it until it started boiling. At this point, the vanillin should have been reacting.
Wait, what? Let me go back.
Over the next 10 minutes, it slowly got... At this point,
What?
the
That's not-
vanillin should have been reacting with the hydroxylamine hydrochloride. Apparently changed.
Yeah, let me go back.
It got hotter and hotter. And I have to... and 6.44 grams of sodium acetate trihydrate.
Okay, never mind.
On top of this, I poured in 25 mils of water, and I stirred it until it all dissolved.
I forgot he's gonna convert. I forgot.
Then into the solution, I dumped in all of the vanillin. As it sat there, the vanillin slowly mixed into the water, but I don't think much of it actually dissolved. This is because vanillin is almost insoluble in room temperature water, and I was gonna have to heat it up. So I covered the beaker with a small watch glass, and I turned on the hot plate. Over the next 10 minutes, it slowly got hotter and hotter, but it didn't look like too much was happening. That apparently changed, though, when it eventually got hot enough, and all of the vanillin quickly disappeared. I then continued heating it
soluble in
until
water.
it started boiling. At this point, the vanillin should have been reacting with the hydroxylamine hydrochloride and turning into vanillin oxime. This was also supposed to be a relatively fast reaction, and I just had to leave it for a bit. When I came back to it about 15 minutes later, it looked pretty much the same. I then took it off the hot plate, and what I had to do next was wait for it to cool down. For over an hour, though, pretty much nothing happened, and it only became slightly cloudy. However, it then turned white, and some really nice crystals started slowly growing.
Ooh.
This was all supposed to be vanillin oxime, and it was separating out because it wasn't very soluble in water. When it eventually cooled to room temperature, I put it in the
How
fridge
long is this
overnight
video anyway?
so that it could fully
An
crystallize.
hour long. Wow.
The next day, I did
Didn't
pretty
realize
much
it.
the exact same thing that I did with the vanillin. I poured all of it into my vacuum filter, and I pulled away the water. I then washed it a few times with cold water, and when I was done, I had some nice crystals, but they were still kind of wet. So I transferred them to a dish, and I put them in the same desiccator as before. This time, though, when I took it out, there was absolutely no smell. To make sure that this was actually vanillin oxime, I tested it to see what temperature it melted at. It ended up being almost exactly the same as pure vanillin oxime, and I was pretty happy to see that. This told me that what I had was quite pure, but I was only able to make 3.2 grams of it, which again,
that's
gonna
not
be
much of
just
a
enough.
yield.
But with
That's
that
not a
being
good
said,
yield
up until
of product
now,
you made.
this vanillin part had honestly been pretty easy. What I had to do next, though, was the part that I was afraid of. I had to turn the vanillin oxime into the final molecule that I needed, called vanilloamine, and I had no idea how to do it. What was even worse was that I tried to do this conversion several times over the years, and it always failed.
Reaction.
I had even tried many completely different ways, and it just never seemed to work. However, there was still one very promising method that I hadn't attempted yet. The only issue was that I couldn't find a decent procedure for it, and it also used mercury, which wasn't ideal. Based on what
that
I read,
would poison you if
I
you
had
tried
a lot
to
of faith that I could
make
make
that
it
hot
work,
sauce.
and I decided to just go for it.
If you tried that,
I used
consume it,
all of
that
the
is.
vanillin oxime that I just made, and the reaction seemed to be working. However, after a couple days, and after way too much testing, I finally accepted that it had failed. I have no idea where I went wrong, or why it didn't work, and I honestly don't know what I expected. Either way, I had just lost everything that I'd spent a week making, but that's just kind of how it is sometimes. My much bigger concern was that I had no idea what to try next. Thankfully, though, after a bunch of searching, I stumbled onto something that I liked. In
The
the
power
past,
of the internet.
I had never
the power
tried
of the
to do
internet.
something called the hydrogenation because all of the methods that I saw always used high-pressure hydrogen, which kind of scared me. This one, though, claimed that it could be done without high pressure, and it just took a lot longer. So, I decided to try it out, but first, I had to buy a bunch more vanilla sugar. I then quickly extracted the vanillin, and I made more vanillin oxime. For this new method, it probably would have been a good idea to be a bit safer and to try it with just a portion of the oxime. However, if this didn't work, I had no other ideas anyway, so I just decided to use
Where's the video
everything
quality
again.
at?
To get started,
Just as I figured.
I got
Here
out
we
one
go.
of my nice flasks, and
Hello,
I connected
Keo,
my argon
welcome.
line
I hope
to
you're
the
doing
neck
great
on the
today,
left.
you cute floof.
I then dropped in a
I
funnel,
hope you're doing
and I
lovely
started
today.
shooting argon into the flask.
We're watching chemistry videos.
This would push out all the air and
By
replace it
Nile
with
Red.
the argon, which is an inert gas. After several seconds, I turned off the argon, and I carefully added a small amount of a catalyst called palladium on
Whoa.
carbon. On top of this, I dropped in a stir bar,
There we
and
go.
then I went and got a beaker.
Moved me a little bit.
Into this, I added 80 mils of pure
There, I'm
ethanol,
under you, Keo.
and this was going to be the solvent for the reaction. I then turned on the stirring, and I dumped in all of the vanillin oxime. It wasn't super soluble in the ethanol, but after stirring it for a couple minutes, it all eventually disappeared.
Wait, what do you
I then
do?
turned the argon back on, and I poured in all of this
Oh.
oxime
Wait, what do you
ethanol
do?
solution. Seconds, I turned the argon
Keo distracted
funnel.
me. How dare you?
on
Hey, I'm just messing.
For this new method, it probably would have been a good idea to be a bit safer and to try it with just a portion of the oxime. However, if this didn't work, I had no other ideas anyway, so I just decided to use everything again. To get started, I got out one of my nice flasks, and I connected my argon line to the neck on the left. I then dropped in a funnel, and I started shooting argon into the flask. This would push out all the air and replace it with the argon, which is an
Elite
inert
tart
gas.
Reaction. Not really.
After several seconds, I turned off the argon,
Just repeating
and
that
I
interesting
carefully
word.
added a small amount of a catalyst called palladium on carbon.
Palladium on carbon. Interesting.
On top of
I like
this, I
that
dropped
word.
in a stir bar, and then I went and got a beaker. Into this, I added 80 mils of pure ethanol, and this was going to be the solvent for the reaction. I then turned on the stirring, and I dumped in all of the vanillin oxime. It wasn't super soluble in the ethanol, but after stirring it for a couple minutes, it all eventually disappeared.
There we go.
I then turned the argon back on, and I poured in all of this oxime ethanol solution. It was very important to do this under argon, because if there was any air around, the catalyst can sometimes ignite the ethanol.
Yeah, which
I was
is
very
pretty
happy
scary.
when I didn't
That'll
see
create
it
an
fire,
explosion.
and I used a bit more ethanol to wash everything. I then turned on the stirring, and I added the last major ingredient, which was concentrated hydrochloric acid. Now, with the flask fully loaded, I took away the funnel, and I replaced it with a stopper. To the middle one, I added a 3-way adapter, and I also swapped the argon one for a stopper. Then, to this new 3-way adapter, I attached a vacuum line, and I added a balloon that I had filled with argon. Before doing anything, I had to be absolutely sure that there was no air or oxygen. So, I switched
We don't
on my
want
vacuum
explosions.
pump, and I turned the valve. I then quickly turned the valve back, and I repressurized it with argon. What I just did here counted as one cycle, and I was gonna have to do it 3 more times. When I was done, it was time to start the fun part, and I swapped out the inert argon balloon for a scary hydrogen one. In general, hydrogen balloons are actually pretty safe, but it is possible for them to explode in a
I like
giant
the blue
fireball.
color that he used for hydrogen.
But anyway, I
It's
then did
great.
the exact same thing that I just did with the argon. The only difference this time was that the hydrogen made my pump sound a lot higher pitched, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's making his electric
But
pump
anyway,
more high
after doing this
pitch.
3 times,
The
the
hydrogen's
flask
causing
should
that.
be
That's weird.
completely filled with hydrogen gas, and now I basically just had to wait. What was happening here was hopefully a hydrogenation, where the oxime was being reduced by the hydrogen and turned into vanillylamine. Any vanillylamine would then quickly react with the hydrochloric acid and turn into vanillylamine hydrochloride. Also, as I mentioned before, all of the black palladium on carbon was just a catalyst, and it was allowing the hydrogen to react with the oxime.
Oh,
As the hydrogen was consumed,
Sorry.
the balloon would shrink, and it was an easy way to track the
Sorry.
progress. With hydrogen, though, there are almost always leaks, so it's not super accurate. But either way, this was going to take a while, and all I had
Yeah,
to
but
do
anyway, yeah.
was occasionally swap the balloon for a
Small
full
balloon.
one.
Oh, now B.
When I came back to it about 24 hours later,
Damn, Dusty.
I think the only difference was that it looked a lot messier. However, it was supposed to be done. What I had to do next was filter everything that was in this flask, but I couldn't just start taking everything apart. It was still full of hydrogen gas, and if I just
I can see the
opened it up,
reflection of his lab
the
a little
whole
bit in the
thing
middle.
could light on fire. I was first
Like
going to
right
have to
there.
get rid of
Oh,
that
damn
hydrogen
it.
balloon and bring
Too
back
late.
the argon one. Then with that in place, I did the same vacuum cycles that I did before, and I replaced everything with argon. At this point, it should have been safe, and I carefully opened it up.
Sorry, but yeah.
I was very happy when nothing lit on fire, but the danger wasn't quite over yet. What I had to do next was filter it, and there was still a chance that it could spontaneously light on fire.
Which is not good.
So just in case, I set up an argon line above my filter funnel to protect everything from air. I then carefully poured everything in, and again, there was thankfully no fire. Everything that made it through the filter was also
looks like
surprisingly
powdered
clear
mold.
and colorless, which I was really happy to see.
Oh, I just
It took about
noticed instead
20
of the A,
minutes
you
for it all
put
to make
S
it
or
into the
F.
beaker,
I
and
actually
then
did not
washed
notice
the
that.
reaction
My
flask
brain
in the
said it was
funnel
an A,
with some
Yeah,
extra
sure.
ethanol.
but no, ARF.
I then waited
But
for
no,
all of that
ARF
to pass
is what
through,
you were trying to
and by
say.
the time that it was done,
Is what you were trying to say.
it looked like it had become a bit yellow, and I'm not exactly sure why. Either way, what I had to do next was get rid of all of the ethanol and any leftover hydrochloric acid.
Ilvi! Aw, thanks for
So I poured
dropping
it all
by.
into a round bottom flask,
Hi.
and
I
I
hope
was
you're
going to
doing
have to do a
great.
distillation.
Good morning.
For this one, though, I decided to make it a
Good
bit more
morning.
interesting, and
I
I
hope you're
used one
doing
of my
great today.
fancier condensers. But anyway, this ended up taking a few hours, and when it was close to being done, it was looking pretty good.
By the way, once again,
However,
thanks
it
for
then
playing
suddenly
with
got
me
cloudy,
in
and not too
VR
long
chat the other
after,
night. Hopefully
it
we
had
can do it again
apparently turned
sometime. I'm
pink.
looking forward to it
I
again.
thought
once
this was
more.
the most that it would change, but then it got even
Ooh,
darker,
It's like
and by
pink,
the
it's like
time it
rose
was
gold.
done, it was a dirty brown.
Test.
I'm not exactly sure why this
Testicular.
happened,
Really?
and I was also a bit
Really?
worried
That's a
that it
good
would
joke
be a
though, but
pain
really?
to get out of the flask. So
I'm
I
glad
stopped
you're
the
doing good, though.
distillation, and I waited for it
And
to cool
yeah,
down.
I mean, and
and
yeah,
I really
I know how
thought
you
this was
feel.
going to be a disaster.
I'm getting a little bit
However,
goofy too.
when I tried shooting in some ethanol, it worked surprisingly well. Everything was almost immediately removed.
Hopefully
from the
next
sides
time
of
when we
the
go to the
flask,
midnight rooftop map
and
that I
some of
don't
it even looked like it was
break
turning
while we
white.
try to hang out there,
I then transferred
and I
it
don't
all
get
to a
shot
small
up into the
beaker,
sky.
and I used a bit more ethanol.
Anyway,
to
yeah,
wash out the
thanks for
flask.
dropping by. We're just watching
What I
chemistry
had to
videos.
do now was turn on the hot plate and bring it to a boil.
Watching Nile Red.
I was doing this to try to clean up all
He's
the solid
basically
stuff,
turning.
which I was hoping
He's basically
was
turning plastic.
vanillylamine
He's
hydrochloride.
basically.
After
He's
boiling it
basically
for a
turning
few
plastic
minutes,
gloves
I took
into
it
hot
off,
sauce.
and almost immediately,
Aw,
I
man,
saw
that
some
sucks.
white powder separating out.
All right,
I was
take your
again
time.
hoping that this was the right thing, and when it eventually got to around room temperature, I put it in the freezer overnight. When I checked on it the next day, it looked like a bit more of it had appeared.
Ooh,
But either
it
way, what I
has.
had to do next was isolate it, and I poured it all into my vacuum filter. I then turned on my pump, and I pulled away all the liquid, and I washed it a few times with cold ethanol.
Ew, that's gross.
When it was eventually done, I dried it in the desiccator, and this was what I was left with.
Sucks you have to deal with that.
It was a bunch of nice and
Jeez,
white powder,
That sucks.
and I was really hoping it was the right thing. The only way to confirm this, though, was to run some tests on it, and I started by checking its melting point. However, unlike last time, I was very disappointed. It was supposed to start melting at 219°C, but it instead started melting at around 208, and then it looked like it burned. Another test was to see if it were soluble in water, and pretty much all of it disappeared, which was good. However, when I added some base to it, which was supposed to bring it back, it never seemed to work. This was exactly what had happened many times in the past when I had tried making it before. The properties of whatever I made just didn't seem to match up with vanillylamine hydrochloride. I was honestly pretty sad at this point, but as one final and desperate test, I decided to run something called an NMR. Just by chance, a week earlier, I'd gotten my hands on a little NMR machine, and I figured I might as well try it
This
out.
machine is
I
cool.
honestly assumed that it was
This
just going to
machine
be a
is really
waste
cool.
of time,
I like it.
but
This is the cool part.
surprisingly, that actually wasn't the case. The result that I got matched up perfectly with what I was hoping for, and when I saw this, I really didn't know what to believe.
Analysis.
According to the NMR, this was vanillylamine hydrochloride.
Analysis.
According to everywhere else, though, that reported the melting point and its other properties,
I don't know.
it was something
Nanalysis.
else. In general, though,
Nanalysis,
NMR is way
I
more
guess.
trustworthy, and I decided to just ignore all the other stuff. Did I actually make
By the way, NMR, the
vanillylamine
N stands for
hydrochloride?
nuclear, by the way.
I wasn't
So it has to
entirely
do with
sure, but I figured that the
radioactive
best way to
shit.
find out
It uses
was
radioactive
to
elements
just move
scan.
on to the next reaction. For this one, I would be finally combining it with the isononanoic acid to make the nordihydrocapsaicin. What was also nice was that if this
The
worked,
nice
I
spicy
wouldn't have to
molecule.
only rely on fancy tests to verify it, and in theory, I
Nordihydrocapsaicin.
could just taste it and see if it burned my mouth off.
Another
the only
interesting
problem with
one.
this step, like I mentioned earlier, was that I really wasn't sure how to do it. Thankfully, though, the paper that I'd used for the hydrogenation might have had the answer. They used a method that I'd never heard of before, and I think it's mostly
Oh, I
used
actually
in
saw that
biochemistry.
video.
However,
I think.
their
The
hydrogenation
Nile Green, I
seemed
think
to
I
work,
saw that.
so I trusted them.
I'm pretty sure I
And I
saw that.
decided
I'm
to
not
give
sure,
it a
but I think
try.
I did.
I'd learned from my past, though,
Reminds
and
me
I
of another
decided
parody
to
I
not
watched
just do
too.
it with everything that I had. This was because I had a lot more than I expected to have at this point, and it seemed like I could get away with using half. This way, if I completely screwed up, I'd at least have one more try. But anyway, to get started, I got a little flask, and I added 15 mils of a solvent called DMF. Then into this, I added 0.76 grams of my isononanoic acid. After that, I turned on the stirring, and I added something
Cool.
called Dipia.
Dipia.
This was a base, and it was supposed to react with the isononanoic
I
acid.
see.
It should have been turning it into its deprotonated form, and this was important for the next step. To make sure that it all reacted, I let it stir for several minutes, and then I added another chemical called HAT2.
I
This
never heard
one
of these chemicals.
should have been reacting
HAT2.
with the deprotonated isononanoic
Is that
acid
like off-brand Hatsune
and
Miku
forming
or
this
something?
new molecule. This reaction was a little bit slow, though,
Hatsu,
and I had to leave it for about 30 minutes. During this time, it slowly got darker and darker, and I wasn't exactly sure if that was a good thing. But either way, when I came back to it, it was time to add the last ingredient. This was the vanillylamine hydrochloride,
Oh, I forgot my VR
and I was
headset is
still
charged.
really hoping that I'd actually
Sweet.
made it. The moment that it was added, it should have been reacting
I was
with some
telling
of
my
the
chat earlier
Dipia
I was gonna
and turning
I
into
was gonna head on to
free-base
VR chat
vanillylamine.
after I'm done streaming.
This should then be able to attack that
I headed on it
isononanoic
this
acid
morning and I
molecule
just
that I
went to
made
go
before.
World Hop
If
and
this were actually
hung
happening,
out.
the vanillylamine would be
I talked to
combining
some
with the
people here and
isononanoic
there,
acid.
but
It
basically
would then
just stayed
kick
to
off that
myself and
extra
relaxed.
junk from the earlier step, and the final result would be my precious spicy molecule called nordihydrocapsaicin. This reaction was supposed to be
I
relatively
like saying
slow,
that
though,
word.
and I was gonna have to leave it
It
here
sounds
for
such
a while.
Sounds like such a cool
So just for
word.
good measure, and to protect it from oxygen, I filled the flask with some argon. I then covered the top, and I left it there overnight. When I came back to it about 20 hours later, it looked like it had gotten a bit lighter. I wasn't sure if this was a good sign, but it at least looked like something had happened. Either way, it was now time to try and separate out the nordihydrocapsaicin and to see if the reaction had actually worked. So I started the fun process by preloading a separatory funnel with some hexanes and dumping everything in. These two things didn't really mix together, and then I added a bunch of saturated salt water. I then did the extraction in the usual way, where I took it off the stand and shook it
Ooh.
around. The idea here was to pull all of the nordihydrocapsaicin into the hexanes, and then to wait for the layers to separate.
I like the
This
green.
was about 10 minutes later, and most of
crumbs
it
on my
should have
desk.
been
Ew.
extracted
I like
into the
the
upper
green.
hexanes layer,
That's a nice green.
so I drained away the lower one. Left in the funnel was just the hexanes, but there was also a bunch of other junk that made it look really dirty. The hexanes itself, though, was relatively clean, and I dumped it all into a beaker. I then put that lower layer back into the separatory funnel, and I extracted it 4 more times. I did this just to really make sure that I got everything out, and I transferred them all to the same beaker. What I had now looked pretty clean, but the extraction probably pulled out some other junk as well. I was going to have to get this out,
Oh,
and to do this,
the
I
brown,
had to
the
put
brown
it all
blobs
back
aren't
into a
concern.
separatory
Okay.
funnel. I then added some dilute hydrochloric acid, which would pull out any basic impurities. After shaking it around, I drained it away, and I repeated the same washing.
Looks like rust. Looks like
I
rust
then did
accumulated
another
on the
washing
inside of
with
the glass.
dilute base, and another with saturated salt water. When I was eventually done, I felt that it was looking pretty good. So I poured it all back into a beaker, and I added some anhydrous sodium sulfate to dry it. When it looked like it was done, I poured it into another beaker, and now in theory, I just had to get rid of the hexanes. This would hopefully leave me with just nordihydrocapsaicin, and I was honestly pretty nervous. Over the next few hours, the hexanes slowly disappeared, and I ended up transferring it to a smaller beaker. I then kept going, and in my opinion, it was looking really promising. However, it was a total failure. All I ended up
What?
with was a very small amount of oily junk, and it was at this moment that I was really happy I only used half of my vanillil amine. Like every other time,
Well, I'm glad
I
he did.
initially didn't know
Because
what
he
had
would have
gone
had to
wrong.
start all over
My
again.
biggest fear was that I hadn't actually made the vanillil amine. However, it turned out that it was just entirely my fault. The procedure clearly said that a solvent called ethyl acetate was used, but this was just a general procedure, and I decided to swap it to hexanes. I did this because the hexanes had worked really well with the isononanoic acid, and I figured that it would work well again.
Makes sense,
However,
but no, it
I was
failed.
completely wrong, and I was punished for my assumption. So now it was
You're
time
damn
to try
right.
it again, except using ethyl acetate, and I only had one chance to make it work. I set the reaction
Ethyl
up in the
acetate.
exact same way as before, and when it was done, 20 hours later, I added it to a separatory funnel.
Ethyl ass.
I also washed it with a bit of water
Okay,
to
I'll
make sure
stop.
that I
I'm
transferred
sorry.
everything.
You didn't hear nothing. I'm
I
sorry.
then
I'll
added a
stop.
bunch of saturated salt
That was
solution,
boring. Yes, I know. I'm
and
sorry.
this easily dissolved everything. After that, I added some ethyl acetate, and I could immediately tell that it was better than the hexanes. It looked like it had actually dissolved stuff, and it had completely pulled out the
once
color.
again,
I then
if
did
I
the
hit
usual
affiliate,
shaking
I'm
part,
gonna
and
make a
this time,
celebration stream.
it was way
Like
cleaner.
stream way longer.
I didn't have any of that weird
It obviously
goopy
have to
stuff
be
floating around,
scheduled on a day
and it was
to
a
where I
lot
don't
easier
work
to
and it's
drain
like
away the
a
lower layer.
weekend. But I think that would be a nice,
But anyway, like
a
before,
very nice
I
celebration
transferred the
stream.
ethyl acetate to a beaker, and I repeated the extraction
Kind of
4
looks like
times.
Red Bull a little bit.
After that, I poured it all back into a separatory funnel.
Yeah, I
and
definitely
I
better
washed
hit
it a bunch
affiliate.
of times.
Yeah,
dilute hydrochloric
I better hit
acid,
affiliate.
Dilute sodium bicarbonate.
Because it's taken me a
and
year.
saturated salt solution. When
It
it was
was-
done, it
Most
looked
of it was
pretty
due
much the same.
to it being
and I put
hard
it all
and me
back
being
into a
lazy.
beaker. I then dumped in some anhydrous sodium sulfate, and I turned on the stirring. Unlike hexanes, ethyl acetate really likes to pick up water,
I had trouble
so
stirring
this
a little
step
bit
was
there.
even more important than before. When I felt that it was ready, the next step was to filter it, and I was already much happier with how this was going. It all ended up making it
I really
through
do hope I hit
relatively
affiliate.
quickly,
The
and what I had to
last
do
stat
now
I need
was get rid
is
of the
have
ethyl
an average
acetate.
viewers of 3.
So I turned on the hot
Have an
plate,
average
and I was just
have an average
hoping to
viewer
be
count
left
of 3
with
plus.
something this time. As it evaporated,
It's
the
like.
color slowly got
Hold on, let me
darker
go
and
on
darker,
my
and
achievements
this
on
was
my
a good
phone.
sign
Let me,
that there was
oh, shit.
something there. After a couple hours, there was almost nothing left, and I transferred it to a vial.
Hold on.
I
Damn,
then
what did I
continued
miss?
evaporating it by blowing air on it
Oh.
until eventually it actually stopped decreasing. I was very relieved when I saw this because it meant that I actually had something, but I now kind of had the opposite problem. I actually had too much stuff, and it was more than I could have even theoretically made. If this were actually Nor-dihydrocapsaicin, it definitely wasn't pure. So I had to come up with a way to purify it, and what I came up with didn't seem too bad. It was very similar to what I had done for the isononanoic
Pop sweet,
acid.
what?
All I needed was a 5% solution of potassium hydroxide, and then into this, I shot in all of the dark oil. Like last time, I was a
Fuck
bit
it, man.
worried that it wouldn't disappear. However, I was very relieved when I turned on the stirring, and most of it quickly dissolved. It was all turning into a water-soluble form, but after a few minutes, there was still some stubborn stuff left over. So I kept adding some more 5% potassium hydroxide, and I was eventually left with a nice and clear solution. There was still a bit of junk floating around, but that was okay, and what I had to do next was pour it into one final separatory funnel. I also washed the beaker with a bit of water just to make sure that I transferred everything. I then added hexanes to dissolve all the junk that wasn't water soluble. This time, though, it wasn't a mistake using hexanes, and I was specifically using it because I knew that it wouldn't touch the Nor-dihydrocapsaicin. I ended up washing it twice with the hexanes, and I got rid of those washings. Then after that, I drained all of my precious orange water into a beaker. The next step was to try and get back the Nor-dihydrocapsaicin, and to do this, I decided to use CO2 gas. I used a pipette to shoot in a gentle stream of it, and this should have been slowly acidifying the solution. Almost immediately, I started seeing some white stuff appearing, and I was very relieved to see this. At this point, I was 95% sure that I had actually made the Nor-dihydrocapsaicin, and it was also looking like it was nice and pure. Over the next 30 minutes, more of it slowly appeared, but it also started changing color. I was really hoping that it would become a white powder, but it was instead looking like a brown goo. A few minutes later, the solution had become completely clear, and I pulled out the pipette. It was stuck to all that goo, though, and I had to smear it on the beaker to get it off. I then dumped off all of the water, and I added some ethyl acetate.
Yeah, it does look cool.
I used the CO2 pipette to shoot around the ethyl acetate, and I kept going until everything had dissolved. Just for good measure, I added a bunch of extra ethyl acetate, and then, like I did a bunch of times before, I added some sodium sulfate to dry it. This time, though, I didn't just filter it through cotton and sea light, and I also used some silica gel. I found that this was very important to take out polar impurities like salts, and it seemed to really help clean it up. It also seemed to take out some of the color, and I ran it through the same filter a few times. When I was eventually done, it was definitely a much lighter color. I also had twice the amount of solvent, though, because I had to wash the funnel a few times with some extra ethyl acetate. Either way, this wasn't an issue, because the next step was to get rid of the solvent. This would hopefully leave me with nearly pure Nor-dihydrocapsaicin, and I turned on the hot plate. After a while, there was barely anything in the beaker, and like before, I transferred it all to a vial. I then continued evaporating it by blowing on it, and again, it eventually stopped decreasing. This time, though, it was actually an amount that was possible to make. It was also definitely way cleaner, but it looked like there was still some solvent in it. So to get rid of it, I stored it under a vacuum, and this was what I had a few days later. It was a much thicker oil, and I couldn't help but think that it kind of looked spicy. It was also barely anything, only around a gram, and it was honestly hard to believe that I spent months trying to make this. At this point, though, I still wasn't completely sure that this was actually Nordihydrocapsaicin. To find out, I was honestly tempted to just taste it, but I didn't really want to potentially poison myself. It was much smarter to first run it.
It's a
through
very
my
small.
new and fancy NMR machine.
It's a very small
So,
yield.
I carefully loaded a sample into it, and I nervously waited for the result. When it eventually popped up on the screen, I was extremely relieved by what I saw. It was almost exactly what I
I'm
was
sorry to
hoping
hear that,
for,
friend.
and it basically
I'm here for you if you ever need help.
that I did
I got
have
your back, buddy.
Nordihydrocapsaicin.
If you want to talk about anything,
However,
I'm here for
I
you.
still felt that to be 100% sure, I just had to taste it. All I needed, though, was an extremely small amount, because if this were Nordihydrocapsaicin, it would be really potent. So I guess I just have to try it. Okay. Okay. It's definitely spicy. Took a couple seconds to sense anything. Yeah. Okay. I was expecting to be much happier when I realized it was spicy. It's kind of just painful. Oh god. Oh, is that from the spice? Oh god. Oh no.
Oh, okay, I see.
I've never
You're
had
welcome
spicy
anyways,
hiccups
friend.
before. Oh, it doesn't feel good. Yeah, it's definitely
Yep, it's definitely
I can confirm that's
Nordihydrocapsaicin. It's definitely
spicy.
it. It's burning his tongue.
Confirmed. So, I guess it worked. I did it. It worked.
Success! He made it. Success.
But anyway, with that all confirmed, I could finally try making my hot sauce, which was now almost 2 years in the making. To get started with this, the first thing that I needed were some ingredients, and most hot sauces are made from chili peppers. However, chili peppers are of course spicy, and it would kind of defeat the purpose if I
Me
used
too.
them. I was instead gonna have to make
Me
it
too. I wish
from
everybody
something that
would
was
get along
completely
too. But sadly,
unspicy,
it's impossible.
and I decided to just go with roasted red peppers.
And yes, it's
For the
hard to be
recipe,
quite well cooked.
I wanted it to
I
be as
can't help
simple
it
as
if I'm hungry.
possible, and I started by adding 2 of the peppers. Then on top of this, I threw in some onions, a small piece of garlic, and some salt. I kind of just made
Sorry,
up
y'all.
this recipe, and I'm normally pretty horrible at
Whoa.
cooking, but I felt like this was so simple that it
God,
couldn't
my Tourette's is
possibly
going
be
crazy
bad.
today.
But anyway, what I had to
Hello.
do next was
I'm moving my
blend it for
microphone a
couple
little
minutes.
So hopefully I'm not ear-raping anybody.
When I eventually felt that it looked nice and liquidy, I turned it off. I then opened it up, and I was pretty happy with what I had. It actually looked like a hot sauce, and it smelled pretty good as well. Right now, though, it was still completely unspicy, and what I had to do next was add the Nordihydrocapsaicin.
Not gonna lie, it looks delicious.
Adding it as that thick oil, though, would have been really hard,
It looks very
and
delicious.
I first had to dissolve it in some ethanol. So, I added a bunch of 94% ethanol, and I mixed it around until it all dissolved.
Oh, it's like a thick sludge.
When it was eventually
This sounds
done,
kind of sound
it was
disgusting.
way goopier than I thought it would be, and I also had no idea how much to use. Based on almost nothing, though, I felt that half of it would be a good amount, and I just went ahead and shot it all in. I then started mixing it around, and now I was basically done. Finally, after probably way too much effort, I had actually made some synthetic hot sauce. The only problem was that I had no idea how spicy it was, and after my last experience, I was honestly a bit scared. I was also a bit
I
worried
bet
that
so.
it wouldn't even taste good, but I guess there was only one way to find out. Okay, so yeah, it's finally time to taste it, and I decided to just put a bunch of it on a chicken wing.
A single chicken
So,
wing.
yeah.
Kind of
that's what I'm
pathetic
doing.
if you ask me.
Oh god.
Okay, is this hot sauce
Ugh.
good?
Oh no. Oh god. It's not as bad. Okay. Honestly, it's pretty good. It's like right on that threshold
Chef Narred
of being
over here.
completely inedible.
Chef Narred.
I think I have to finish this wing, right? Do I put more sauce on? You know what? I need to put more on. I think the truly. Oh, my whole face is burning. Oh, why am I doing this? Oh god. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely like a chicken wing hot
I
sauce.
wish I could taste it. I bet it's good.
But honestly,
Once
in terms of
again, I don't
flavor,
get chatters who just come by and
I rate
say
it like
hello or hi
7
or do weird stuff
and a
or
half. Which is pretty
play
good.
a sound alert and then they
In terms
just
of
leave.
spiciness?
Like, I guess
7. It could be worse.
I'm not cute and funny enough.
Okay,
I don't know.
so
I'm
it had
just messing.
apparently all worked out,
But yeah.
and I was actually able to turn plastic gloves into hot sauce. Or, I mean, technically plastic gloves and vanilla, which I honestly think is even better. Also, this was something that I'd been wanting to do since I started this channel, and I'm really glad that I was finally able to do it. For now, though, I think I need a break from doing so
Aw.
much organic chem.
Thank you, friend.
Instead, I think I'm gonna work on more cutting-edge projects, like
Thank you
turning
so
wood
much.
into a bouncy ball.
You're too sweet.
But anyway, this project ended up taking way longer than I thought, and I think it took about 4 months to put it all together. So, I really want to give a big thanks to all my patrons for making long projects like this possible, and to Micro Center for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already heard about Micro Center, they're a great resource for tech, DIY, and just computer stuff in general. They have a huge array of parts and peripherals, and they sell almost anything you'd ever need. Whether you're looking to get into 3D printing,
Whatever, I don't care. Whatever. Okay, enough of self-promotion over here. We're sponsoring. Okay. Okay, this is his newest one.
this video
Turning... Ew. Ew. Chinese spyware company. Ew. I watch way too much Louis Rossman. Okay. Okay, this one's interesting. Turning paint thinner into cherry soda.
has been sponsored
This sounds
by
very
Opera.
toxic and
A
impossible,
few
but
years
it's
ago,
possible.
I turned plastic gloves into grape soda, and now
There.
I want to try turning paint thinner into cherry soda. This is something that I've been wanting to try for a while, and at first, it might sound like it makes no sense, especially because of how horrible tasting and toxic paint thinner is. However, just like the grape soda
Also,
and
I just
all
got
of
a
the other
scary
transformations that I've
notification
done over
from
the
my mom.
years,
She said there's like
it
30
should be
cops
possible.
outside.
This is because a
searching-
lot of paint
searching and
thinners
looking for
contain a
something.
solvent called
I wonder
toluene,
what's going on.
which I guess is
It's
good at
actually
thinning
kinda creepy.
paints. On its own, toluene
Is there like
isn't
a-
super
Is there
special,
like a thief
but what I
running
find
around
is
in the neighborhood or
interesting
something?
is how similar it is to this chemical called benzaldehyde, which is commonly used as a cherry flavor. In my opinion, it's almost shocking how close they are, and the only
Yeah.
difference is this small extra part here.
But yeah, those types of
Other than
chatters
that,
are weird.
though,
Hello,
they're basically
hi,
the same,
and then they leave
and it's
immediately
really
after they
weird
say
to
hello.
me that such a small
Like,
change makes it go from tasting
If you're
like
gonna at least say
gasoline
hi, at least stay for a few
to
minutes.
fruit.
Don't immediately
But
leave.
anyway, in theory, considering how close they already are, it should be possible to convert one into
Not
the
gonna lie, I
other.
kind of hate those kind
So
of
based on
chatters.
this, my goal was to get some
It's
paint
really
thinner and
frustrating
extract the
and
toluene,
irritating
turn that
to
into
an
cherry
extent.
flavor by using chemistry and science, and then use
Toluene.
that to make some hopefully tasty cherry soda. On paper, this all seemed relatively simple, but in practice, this conversion can actually be kind of annoying, and I wasn't even sure how to do it.
What the
I
fuck is that
decided to just
spiky
get
helmet
started
thing in the
anyway,
background?
though, and the first thing that I needed was some paint thinner. I was a bit worried that it would be hard to find a toluene-based
thinner,
one, but they
I heard,
apparently
is
had
very
exactly
stinky
what I was
and
looking for
very toxic.
at my local hardware store. It was actually advertised as being entirely
And flammable.
toluene, which I was
By the
really
warnings
happy
on
to
the
see,
can.
because it meant that I might not have to purify it. At the same time, though, it said that it was professional grade, which didn't really mean anything, and it was very possible that it contained some nasty impurities. So, I was going to have to do a quick test on it by sucking a bunch of it out and shooting it into a mixture of sulfuric acid and something called isotin. The thing that I was most concerned about were some stinky sulfur impurities, and in theory, if they were present, it
Stinky.
should cause it to turn blue. After sitting there for about 10 minutes, though, there was clearly no blue color, which was a very good sign.
Which means
This
that
told me that the toluene was
which
probably
means the
pure enough to
toluene
use it
he has
directly, and the only
is
thing that I had to do
100%
now
pure.
was get
Pure
rid of any
toluene.
water that might be in it. This was thankfully pretty easy, and I just poured a bunch of it into a small bottle, along with something called 3A molecular sieves that I got from Amazon. These little beads are able to selectively pull out the water, and all I had to do was let it sit here for about a day. Okay, so now that I had my paint thinner pretty much ready to go, all I had to do next was figure out how I was actually going to do it. In theory, there were probably several methods that I could have used, but I felt that I only had
Atard
one real
reaction.
option. This is because one of the methods, called the Atard reaction, seemed to be the easiest, and it also used a chemical that just happened to be one of my favorites. This chemical in particular is called chromal chloride, and I actually made this entire tube of it a few years ago. It was sealed in glass because it's toxic, carcinogenic, and highly volatile.
Yeah.
But it was finally time to crack it open. Then, when I felt ready, I tipped it over into the flask,
chromal chloride.
and I was greeted with
Chromium
a really nice
chromal
blood red
chloride
liquid,
is like
which was
the
all
most
chromal chloride.
darkest and
It was
most
also letting
evil-looking
off a
liquid.
bunch of nasty
Like you said, it's
fumes,
carcinogenic
and it was
and
really important
deadly.
to not breathe in any of this.
If you breathe in
But
any of
anyway,
that, you're gonna
with
fucking
everything
die.
safely in the flask,
Your lungs are
I
just going to
temporarily
disintegrate.
sealed it,
Possibly.
and now I could start doing some chemistry. So I went and got a large
Oh my god!
flask,
Oh my
and
god!
I
You just
carefully
took the words
added
out of my mouth.
10 grams of the toluene
I
paint
just
there.
about said
Then on top
that
of
it looks
this,
tasty.
I dumped in 40
you get
mils
my mind.
of a
Yes,
solvent
it does
called
look tasty.
DCM, which
But-
would dilute the toluene,
But
and
radically
we'll explain
toxic.
why
though.
this is very important in a bit. After
QE
that,
QE
I
in
dropped
just
in
a
a
few
stir
minutes.
bar, and I lowered the entire flask into a large dish that was sitting on a stir plate. With all of this in place, things were looking pretty good, and now
Why is there a paper
I
clip?
just had to
paper
add a
clip in
few
the bottom
things
of
above
that?
the flask. So I just
Okay.
quickly dropped in a thermometer, an addition funnel, and a condenser column. To the end of the condenser, I also added a little tube filled with calcium chloride, which would prevent any moisture from getting into the setup. Now, with all this glassware in place, I went back to the addition funnel, and I dumped in 45 mils of
How long is this
DCM.
video?
Then on
45
top of
minutes.
this, what I had to do next was add my beautiful chromal chloride, so I went over to my little flask of it, and I carefully opened it. And
See
even
the
more
fumes
carefully,
coming off of it?
I was gonna have to pour
That's how
some of it
dangerous it
into a
is.
grad cylinder.
It's really mean
The goal
and
here
evil.
was to measure out a little bit
It's an
more than
evil,
15
evil
mils, and I had to be really careful.
But it's a
to
nice
not
and
spill
beautiful
any
looking
of it.
liquid, though. It's pretty, though.
It all thankfully went
Bright
really
yellows
well,
and
though,
reds.
and when I was eventually done,
And inky
I took
looking
all
blacks.
of this scary blood red liquid, and I dumped it into the addition funnel. With it all loaded in, things seemed to be going pretty well so far, until I noticed that the funnel sucked, and it was leaking chromal chloride.
Yeah.
This was actually kind of a huge pain, but I was able to quickly transfer it to a new funnel, and I washed it down with some more DCM. I also stirred it around to make sure
That's
that
funny.
it
In
was
the background,
fully
you heard
mixed,
him go, "Aww."
and that was about it. Okay, so now, with that whole crisis averted, I was almost ready to start the reaction. The only other thing that I had to do
But yeah,
was go
you
back
heard
to
him in
the
the
large
background go,
dish, add some water and
"Aw."
ice, and turn on the stirring.
He was so
This
upset.
cooling step was actually extremely important, and I found many sources that said if it weren't cooled properly, it could potentially explode. I even found a first-hand account of
That's
this
not good.
happening on a chemistry forum, and I would be lying if I said that this didn't make me a bit nervous to do it. It was supposed to be fine though, as long as I kept the temperature below around 45°C, which shouldn't be hard if I just went slowly and carefully. But anyway, at this point, it should have been cold enough, and I guess it was time to start the reaction. To get things going, all I had to do was slowly open the funnel, and a bunch of the chromal chloride started dripping into the flask. Almost immediately, it was all turning brown, which I felt was a good sign. This is because the reaction between the chromal chloride and the toluene is supposed to form a complex called the Atard complex, which is described as being brown. The only problem is
it's
that the
Atard
formation of this
complex
complex
reaction.
is also supposed to release a lot of heat, which, as I mentioned earlier, could lead to an explosion. This is why it was really
You don't want a
important
mini
to
bomb
add
in your
things
laboratory.
slowly and to cool it, and why it was also very important to dilute everything with DCM. By doing all of this, it would make it
Dichloromethane.
much easier to keep the
DCM.
reaction under control, and in theory, there should be little to no risk of exploding. With that being said, though, I just kept adding the chromal chloride in small spurts, and I was very careful to keep the temperature low. This ended up taking a few hours, and by the time I was done, it didn't look like too much had happened. I still just had some dark black liquid, and according to some procedures,
Cute face in
I
chat.
just had to let it stir
Yeah,
for a
that's
couple
cute.
more hours.
You're adorable.
There were others, though, that said it could explode if stirring were stopped too soon,
Oni-chan
so I
is
decided to
adorable.
just let it stir overnight.
Oni-chan's adorable.
When I came back to it in the morning, it thankfully hadn't exploded, and what I had to do next was take this whole thing apart. So I quickly popped out the condenser, and I took away the funnel and the thermometer. I was then able to pull the flask itself off the stand,
Now it looks
and
like
what
rusty
I had
water.
now was a nasty mixture of DCM and unreacted chromal chloride, and hopefully a bunch of Atard complex. The only issue is that it looked like the complex had become a thick sludge,
At the
and
bottom
it
of
was
the
all
flask.
stuck to the bottom of the flask. A lot of papers also said that it wasn't just the reaction and that the complex itself is explosive, which made this situation even more difficult. I figured that the best way to loosen it, though, was to just hold it over a stir plate and to let the stir bar gently break it apart. This actually worked surprisingly well, and after several minutes, I felt that it was looking pretty good. I then decided to try and pour it all out into a beaker, and I was happy to see that almost everything was transferred. Just to really make sure that I got all of it,
It's
though,
gross looking.
I washed the flask a couple times with some DCM. Okay,
I
so
love
now with everything
chemistry.
safely out of the
Chemistry
flask,
videos are so
the
cool.
next thing that I had to do
I can't do
was
it myself, but
decompose the scary
chemistry
Atard
videos, watching it
complex.
and set was cool.
To do that, though, it was supposed to be pretty simple, and I just had to get another beaker with some water in it and to add something called sodium sulfite.
I was
When
gonna
it
make
had
a
all
joke there,
dissolved,
but that
I
would have
added
not
in a
been
bunch
appropriate.
more, and on top of this, I
You'll
kept
probably
throwing in
guess what I was
ice.
gonna say.
Eventually, I had an ice cold and saturated solution of sodium
But yeah,
sulfite,
y'all probably
and it
can
was
guess what I
time to
gonna
quickly
say.
go back and grab my reaction mixture. Now, to destroy the complex, all I had to do was carefully pour it in
Yeah, y'all
very
probably
small
could guess.
portions. It was kind of hard
I
to
hate
tell what
having
was
to mute my
happening,
microphone just to
but the
yell at my brother
complex
to get him to
was
shut up.
supposed to be reacting with
Like,
the
jeez.
water. The water should have been splitting
I'm
it
a little
apart
quiet,
into my
'cause I
hopefully
moved away from the
beautiful
mic.
and amazing cherry flavor and into a bunch of nasty chromium junk. The only tricky part here is that the benzaldehyde is somewhat sensitive and prone to oxidation, and this is why I included a bunch of sodium sulfite. All the sodium sulfite should almost immediately react with anything that might damage the benzaldehyde and help keep it safe. What was also a very
Benzaldehyde
good
is
sign
cherry flavor.
was that I would occasionally get hit with a strong and sweet cherry smell, which told me that I was probably making benzaldehyde. But anyway, I eventually added the last bit of my reaction mixture, and the explosion risk was thankfully over. I then let it stir for another 20 minutes, and now, assuming that the benzaldehyde was actually in there, I had to somehow get it out. This wasn't supposed to be super hard, though, and I just had to pour it all into a big separatory funnel and it all quickly
Now
started
it kind of looks
separating.
like green dye.
The lower layer was all the DCM from the reaction, and it should have contained most of the benzaldehyde. So to separate it, I just opened the valve, and I carefully drained it into a beaker. I then went back to the water that was left behind in the funnel, and I dumped in a bunch of fresh
I hope
DCM.
y'all have enjoyed the stream
After that,
so
I
far.
capped it and
We're
shook it
getting
around
towards
vigorously,
a little bit
and I was
close to the
doing
end of the
this
stream.
to try to get out as
But I
much
hope
of
y'all
the
enjoyed it so
benzaldehyde as
far.
possible.
I've had such a
This
great
because
time.
it's a lot more soluble in DCM,
We started
and in
off with a
theory,
silly,
if any of it
somewhat
was still
silly
left
video,
behind,
and then we started
it
watching.
should be pretty easily
cool
pulled
shit.
from the water. I then drained this DCM
I like doing
into
just
the
chatting
same
streams.
beaker
It's
as
really fun
before,
and chill. I
and
love
just
it.
to really make sure that I got out everything,
But
I
hopefully
did this
can
washing
find
step
a game.
few more times.
But hopefully I can find.
When I was done,
But
I was left
hopefully
with
I
a
can
kind
find a
of
game that I
gross
can stream
and
soon
cloudy yellow
that I want
liquid,
to play.
and I was gonna have to clean it up a
I
bit.
can stream VR chat one
So
day.
I
That'd be
transferred
pretty
it all
cool.
back into a fresh separatory
But-
funnel, and I washed it with some distilled water, followed by some
I'll tell you one
saturated salt
thing.
water. This
I
caused
would
it
be
to
kind of
change quite
nervous
a
doing
bit,
that because there's
and for
lots
the
of
milkiness to mostly
stream
disappear,
bombers in that.
and I felt that it was looking a
community.
lot better. It was still a bit cloudy though,
I was
probably
bombed by
because there
people
was some
saying
water
racial
in it,
slurs.
and I was gonna have to
And
dry it up.
thankfully that day
So I
wasn't
transferred it to a
recording.
stir plate,
Why would I
dropped in a
record?
stir bar,
But I'm
and
glad I
added
wasn't
a bunch of
because
magnesium
that would have been pretty
sulfate.
bad.
This
It
would
could get my Twitch
selectively
channel
react with
destroyed.
any water that was in there and pull it out of the DCM. After stirring
Which
for a
about
while,
happened
I felt that
before.
it was looking good,
If y'all remember,
and I
a year
filtered it
ago,
directly into
a
a
couple
round
of streams
bottom
back
flask.
of me playing
I was
Unturned,
really hoping
and
to see
somebody
a nice and clear
joining the
solution come
server I was
through,
in
but it honestly
and
kind of
stream
looked the
sniping
same.
me. That was
except
honestly
it
the
was
most
maybe a
stressful and
little
scariest
lighter.
experience ever.
Either way, up until this point, things seemed to be going really well, and to isolate the
I know,
benzaldehyde,
Like maybe
I
join
just
like
had to get rid of
private,
the DCM.
like maybe make private worlds
So
and have
I
friends
started
like
setting
collab
it
and
up for a
join.
distillation by
That'd
adding
probably
a
be
three-way adapter,
the most best
a
way to
thermometer,
stream VR
and a
chat.
condenser column.
I'd say.
I then put the rest of it together, and this was what the entire setup looked like. To get started, I just turned on the heating mantle and the stirring, and within a few minutes,
Yeah, that works.
it
that
was already
works.
boiling. I was also collecting some nice and clear DCM in the beaker, and now, all I had to do was wait. Over the next 20 minutes, the DCM slowly boiled away, and eventually, I was left with a dark, oily liquid. In theory, this should
It
have
looks
been
like
mostly
used motor oil
benzaldehyde,
to an
but it
extent.
looked insanely dirty, and if I planned on eating this, it was gonna have to be at least a bit cleaner.
Yeah.
So I carefully transferred it all to a much smaller flask, and I figured that I just had to do another distillation. This time, though, the setup was going to be a bit more complicated because I had to do it under vacuum. If I did it with any air present, the benzaldehyde might get destroyed, and this was the setup that I put together. It was really similar to the first one, except for this part, with 3 flasks attached to it,
Not
but that
gonna
will all
lie.
make sense in a minute.
Besides the third one,
Either way,
it
when
looks
I
like
felt that I was ready,
a
I
glass
just
nut
turned on the
sack
heating and
to an
stirring,
extent.
and I waited for it to heat up. Eventually, it
Oh wait a
started
second.
boiling,
You did not
and
hear anything.
vapors were
I
climbing
promise
the
I'm a
column,
wholesome angel. I
and
promise.
I started collecting
No.
something in the flask. At this
I
point,
promise.
though, everything
I
coming
promise
over
I'm
was
wholesome.
just side
You didn't hear
products
anything.
and other junk. However, the temperature of the vapor was slowly rising, and when
Sorry,
it
I've been
eventually
doing
got
too
to the
much.
boiling
I've
point
been
of
researching
benzaldehyde, I carefully switched
Too
it over
much
to
the
the
way
next flask.
humans act.
The temperature then stopped increasing, and it stayed solid at the boiling point, and this was a very good sign.
I came to
It
Earth
meant
to
that
do
I was now
research and protect
collecting
the humans,
what should be some nice
but
and pure
so far my
benzaldehyde,
research.
and I was very
So
happy
far
to
my
see this.
research.
After about 20
I don't
minutes,
know.
I'd collected quite a bit, and the temperature started rising again, so I
Man, human
switched it to
culture
the third
really is
flask.
weird.
I also turned off the heating mantle because at this point, the distillation was done. Left in the original flask was a bunch of nasty dark tar, and I just had to wait for everything to
Kind
cool
of looks
down.
like chromium a little bit.
So I let it sit there for about 10 minutes before releasing the vacuum, and then I carefully popped off all the flasks. This was what I was left
Yeah,
with,
they really are
labeled in
weird.
the order that I collected things, and I immediately got rid of the first and the last because they were just junk. The one in the middle should have contained my nice and pure benzaldehyde, and I transferred it all to a little vial. Up until now, things seemed to be going super well, and I was honestly kind of surprised by how smoothly it had all gone. Chemistry's usually a huge pain, but sometimes it just kind of works, and I figured that this was one of those
Foreshadowing.
times. So to
Foreshadowing.
celebrate, I decided to take a proper smell of my sweet and cherry benzaldehyde, and I was immediately brought back to reality. Not only did it not smell anything like cherry, it kind of smelled like hydrochloric acid, and it burned my nostrils. There was also a lingering burn that continued lasting for hours, and it made my eyes water a bit. This was definitely not the cherry flavor that I was looking for, and I was immediately very confused. This is not only because it had the exact same boiling point as benzaldehyde, I had also run something called a TLC, and it matched up perfectly as well. Clearly, though, this was something else, and I decided to do one last test. So I went and got a small beaker, and I added 1.7 grams of sodium bisulfite, followed by 4 mils of water, and a stir bar. I then stirred it until it all dissolved, and when I felt that I was ready, it was time to dump in all my mystery oil. If this were actually benzaldehyde,
Stop.
it should all quickly react with the sodium bisulfite
Silly.
and turn into a solid. So I patiently waited for a bunch of solid stuff to appear,
Silly cutie.
but after letting it stir for over 20 minutes, I had to accept that nothing was going to happen. On the bright side, though, I could now definitively say that this wasn't benzaldehyde, and I'm pretty sure that it was actually benzyl chloride, which chemically looks pretty close. Benzyl chloride is horrible, though, and it was used in World War I as a tear gas, and it wasn't exactly the amazing cherry flavor I was hoping for.
He made the exact opposite.
But either way, at
he
this
made
point,
a tear gas.
I had no idea what
type
had gone
of
wrong.
solution.
I had done almost exactly what all the procedures had said, and assuming that they weren't all lies, it should have worked. Clearly, though, I had made some sort of mistake,
You can
and I was
cause some
gonna have
war
to
crimes
figure
with
it out.
that.
The only problem was that I had no idea what to do, and on top of this, I only had enough chromal chloride for one more attempt. So I did the only logical thing that I could think of, and I just gave up. It wasn't until 2 years later that
And
I
he just
finally
gave
got
up.
the motivation to try it again, and I had some ideas that I really felt would fix everything. My first idea was that instead of using DCM, which might have been causing some problems, I wanted to try using the solvent that was originally used for this reaction when it was first discovered over 100 years ago. This solvent in particular is called carbon tetrachloride, and it's actually pretty similar to DCM. However,
Carbon
unlike
tetrachloride.
DCM, it has actually been internationally banned for most uses because it's not only toxic, it also depletes the ozone layer.
Which is
Getting
not good
it now
for this
can
planet.
be hard and expensive, but 7 years ago I was able to get this for free, and I guess it was finally time to use it. Besides just changing the solvent, though, my second major idea was that this time I would isolate the ATARD complex, which, as I mentioned before, was supposed to be explosive. This was why in my first attempt I did the safer method out of fear, and I destroyed it while it was still mixed with the DCM. However, I found some procedures that suggested filtering it off and isolating it because it supposedly gave a purer result. Again, though,
I see.
considering that it's often described as being an explosive intermediate, and that isolating it probably makes it more sensitive, I was kind of afraid of exploding. However, at this point, I was pretty desperate to make it work, and I was willing to do anything that was necessary. Then on top of all of this, just for good measure, I bubbled argon gas through the chromal chloride to knock out any HCl that might be present. After that, I also distilled it, and this gave me chromal chloride that I knew was absolutely pure. I also distilled the carbon tetrachloride as well as the toluene, and at this point, I felt that I was pretty much good to go, and there was literally nothing more that I could do. So I just went ahead and got started, and I put together almost exactly the same setup as before, except this time, it was all prepared using carbon tetrachloride instead of DCM. I would also be cooling it with just regular water instead of
very
ice
interesting
water.
stuff.
And when I felt that I
As
was
y'all can
ready,
see.
I opened the funnel, and I started the reaction.
I do watch very interesting videos.
Just like
as
the
you can
first
tell.
time, all of the chromal chloride turned brown
I have
the
taste,
moment that
don't
it
worry.
hit, and it pretty much looked exactly the same. I then kept adding it at a slow and steady pace, and I carefully watched the temperature. Even without the ice water, it actually didn't rise that much, and a few hours later, I was left with some familiar black liquid. I then let it stir overnight to prevent a potential explosion, and in the morning,
I just got a
it was looking
spicy
pretty
idea.
good.
I just
What
got
I
a
had to
really
do
nice
now was
idea.
take the whole thing
When I
apart,
do hit affiliate,
and
maybe
this
I
was when
should
the
do a
procedure
Minecraft
would really
hardcore
start to
stream
change. Unlike
and
last
see how
time,
long I can
was
last
gonna have to
before
separate out
I
all
lose,
of this
I die, and
potentially
then
explosive
lose
stuff,
my entire world.
and I wasn't exactly
permadeath.
feeling excited about it.
That would be a very, very good
Now,
celebration stream.
Fun part,
Something very, very
where we get
interesting to just do,
Yeah.
just do for the
The
community.
only good
and just
part was that the setup was
hang
pretty
out and do.
simple.
I'm
and I
probably
basically
gonna,
just
I'm
needed a
probably gonna
vacuum
be
filter.
mentally tired
Just
by
for
the
good measure,
time I'm
though,
done
I
with
also
doing
added a small tube,
that.
which would
that
shoot
is
in
actually a
argon
pretty
gas
cool
and protect
idea, though,
everything
not
from
gonna
air
lie.
and moisture. This unfortunately wouldn't prevent an explosion or anything, but it was supposed to help stop the HRD complex from degrading. But anyway, when I eventually felt that I was ready, I carefully started pouring it into the filter. I was actually able to transfer pretty much everything, and with it all
looked a little bit
safely in the
syrupy at
filter,
end there.
I turned on the vacuum pump. This immediately started pulling away the nasty liquid, and eventually, I was left with a scary puck of black powder. Now, all I had to do was wash this puck and the flask with a bunch more carbon tetrachloride. I was doing this to get rid of as much side product and other junk as possible, and after doing this several times, I felt that it was as clean as it was gonna get. Up till this point, things had been going surprisingly
Also, I bet
well.
y'all noticed, but the new
and the
Genshin
only thing left to do was
Lantern
to
Rite
dry
event
it.
released
So
yesterday.
I left the
I
vacuum
got
pump
started on it
and I
early,
carefully
and I'm
mixed
liking it so
around,
far. I got
and
to
this
meet
was the part
Gaming,
that I
and
was
he's pretty
most
cool.
nervous about. This
And-
because in theory, if
and-
this were
and-
anything like most
and they'll
explosives,
give you a chance to
it would
invite
get
a character.
more and more unstable
All the
as it
characters that they
dried.
have,
So as I stirred it,
all of the characters
I
that they have,
slowly
you can
got
invite to
more
your
and more
party. I
anxious.
have now.
thankfully though, I didn't explode, and after
I
several
have
minutes,
every one of them.
I felt that
Even
it was
Yao
dry
Yao.
enough. What I had now should have been a bunch of HRD complex, and I could
'Cause I
actually
claimed Yao
smell
Yao
the
like last
benzaldehyde
year.
coming off of it.
Like last
Which
year's
was a
Lantern
very
Rite
good
and Genshin
sign.
Impact. And Genshin
However,
Impact.
before moving on,
But
I
but
felt that I had to see
but
just how
they're
unstable
giving you
it
an
was.
opportunity to
So for a
claim
little
gum.
test,
to-
I took
to
a small
claim
amount
Gummy.
of it.
Oh, he is so
And I
good
hit
and
it with
very
a hammer.
strong. He's a very fun.
I was kind of
and
expecting
very
it
strong
to make a
pyro
pop
character.
or a bang or something.
I'm definitely
but it didn't
gonna.
really
I'm
do
definitely gonna
anything.
invite him.
Even after I bashed it many times.
Oh, have
This
I
told me
played
that it
Lethal-
wasn't super shock sensitive, but it could still
Oh,
be
have I played
explosive,
Lethal Company?
and
No,
I wanted to try
I have
lighting it on
not.
fire.
But it kind
I
of
was
annoyed
expecting
me.
it
But
to at least flare up, like it was gunpowder or something, but again, nothing really happened. At some point,
It just
all quickly
decomposed.
degraded, but besides that, it was almost shockingly tame.
it turned into like moss or
The
some
moment
shit.
that I saw this, I was relieved that I wasn't actually working with a horribly explosive chemical.
But yeah,
At the same time, though, I was kind of
Not gonna lie,
disappointed
people talking
that
about
I
it a
didn't
lot,
get any cool explosions.
and bragging.
and
And
I have no
bragging
idea
or what they
why
were
it's
talking about,
often
it kind of
described as
annoyed me
being
to the point where it
explosive.
kind of watered down
It's
Lethal
possible
Company
that
for
it
me a
still
little
just
bit.
wasn't dry
But
enough,
I am
and there
open to
was too
try
much
it in the
carbon
future.
tetrachloride still there. But
I really
I
need to
don't know.
play some horror games
anyway,
on
though,
my
getting
Twitch
back
channel.
to what I was
I really
actually
need to
trying
do that.
to do,
I have
the
not
next
played
step
one
was
yet,
to degrade all of
and
this
I know it will be a
complex
super fun
and
and
hopefully
very
turn it
hilarious
into
time.
cherry flavor. To do
To
this,
see Kizu's,
I just had to
see
mix
Kizu
up
scream
another
and break
fresh and
down.
cold solution of sodium sulfite and slowly add in the powder. This time, the reaction was a lot slower, but
Ew,
like
it's like
before,
dirt, mud,
the
and
complex
some
should have been reacting with the water and splitting apart into benzaldehyde and a bunch of chromium junk. The major difference this time, though, was that because I isolated the powder, I wasn't
Oh, you have
also
it?
adding a
Aw,
bunch of extra
cool.
chromal
I'd like
chloride
to try it with you
unreacted
sometime. Maybe we can
toluene,
collab.
and side products from the original
Maybe
reaction.
we can collab with each other
So,
sometime.
if I were making benzaldehyde
That
here,
would be really fun.
it should be
I collabed
relatively
once
pure.
with my friend Uni, and
But
it was
anyway,
the most fun
when I
and the most
eventually added all
chaotic
the
time
powder,
ever, and I loved it.
I let it stir for 15 minutes.
I'm
just to
definitely
make
looking
sure that
forward
it all
to a next
degraded.
collab.
I then transferred all of this to a separatory funnel, and this purification step was basically the same as last time. The only difference was that, again, I used carbon tetrachloride instead of DCM. I then thoroughly shook it around, just like before, and waited for the layers to separate, and I drained each washing into a beaker. When I was eventually done, this was what I had, and I was hoping that
The
all
tar
the
complex
benzaldehyde was
made.
in there. It was definitely going to have to be cleaned up a bit, though, so I put it all back into a fresh separatory
Awesome.
funnel, and I washed it with water
I'm glad to hear that.
and saturated salt solution.
Looking forward to it.
This easily got rid of most of that gross green chromium junk, and what I was left with was already looking a lot better than the first attempt. It was way less cloudy and not
It is, it's
nearly
looking
as
way
yellow, and I was actually feeling really good about it.
It's looking
There
mostly
was still
clear.
a bit of water in it though, so I dropped in a stir bar, turned on the stirring, and dumped in a bunch of magnesium sulfate drying agent. I then let this stir for a while, and after about 20 minutes, I filtered it directly into a flask. Unlike last time, this actually gave me a nice and clear solution, and now, in theory, all I had to do was get rid of the solvent. So, I
Yes.
quickly put together the same
Get
distillation
rid of the
setup,
solvy.
and I cranked up the heating.
I'm joking.
I
Get rid
then
of the
waited
solvent.
for it all to distill over, and as it slowly decreased, I was actually feeling really hopeful. This was not only because it was looking way cleaner than the first attempt, it was also because I had seen how much a tard complex I had made. It was actually a huge amount, and in my mind, there was no way that I wouldn't get a bunch of benzaldehyde out of it. The only problem was that by the time it was done, and all the solvent was gone, I barely had anything left. Even if I assumed that this was nearly pure benzaldehyde, the amount was still almost pathetic, and it wouldn't be enough to make my cherry soda. The only good thing was that it actually smelled like benzaldehyde this time, and it only slightly burned my nose and my eyes. I just didn't understand what had gone wrong, though, and I hated how familiar this feeling was. This time, I was also even more confused because I had isolated such a huge amount of the tard complex, which had clearly smelled like benzaldehyde. For a second, I considered that maybe I was just bad at chemistry, which was very possible.
Not possible. You're good
But I
at
felt that it was much more
Te-
likely that
Not
the carbon
really.
tetrachloride
I mean, not possible.
had just somehow
You're
not
good at
extracted
chemistry.
it properly. It was very possible that the solvent I'd been saving for almost a decade had failed me, and I was going to have to go on a salvage mission. So I threw the whole reaction mixture back into a separatory funnel, and I did everything again, except with diethyl ether. I then shook it around like every
Diethyl
other
ether.
time and waited for the layers to separate, except this time they didn't, because a bunch of solid chromium salt had precipitated.
Yep, which is blocking
Many
it from
procedures
separating.
suggested that adding acid could fix this, though, so I added some dilute hydrochloric acid, and it seemed to work pretty well.
It did break the emulsion.
The ether layer was actually able to separate, and I did this extraction a few more times. I then combined everything and washed it with water and
It actually
sodium
looks kinda
bicarbonate, dried it, and started distilling it. I was really hoping that the ether would save me and that a bunch of benzaldehyde would just
Heh.
magically appear,
It'll-
but it was
it'll be
somehow
Kizu
even
sh-
worse than I could have
It'll
ever
be
imagined.
Kizu collab.
I didn't just not get
It
very
would be
much of
super
it,
cute.
I literally got nothing. So it apparently wasn't an issue with the solvent that I'd used, and after seeing this, I started getting very worried that the other
LVQR.
theory might be true. What was even worse, though, was that I officially had absolutely no idea how to fix this, and I honestly felt like just quitting again, but I really didn't want to have to revisit this in another 2 years. So instead of just immediately giving up, I decided to at least try one desperate attempt to fix it. It made zero sense, but I again went back and got the original reaction, and I dumped half of it back into the separatory funnel. I then poured in a bunch of sodium carbonate, which was pretty much the opposite of what I had done before. I was now making it more basic instead of acidic, and I was a bit worried that it would make the chromium salts come back, but it was apparently fine. On top of this,
Interesting.
I also added some diethyl ether, and I extracted it several times. I then did the same thing on the other half and combined everything, washed it, dried it, and transferred it all to a flask. After that, I did the same distillation as before to get rid of the solvent, and I was honestly expecting it to just fail again. However, at some point, it looked like the volume stopped decreasing, and I was actually left with a bunch of slightly yellow oil. So apparently adding the base had magically done something, and the moment that I saw this, I was pretty
But does
excited.
it burn?
I had no idea
Does it
how
burn
much
your
of this
eyes or
were
nose?
actually benzaldehyde, but even if it were half, it would still be a lot better than the first recovery. For that one, I got way less, and it was a lot more yellow, but there was probably at least some benzaldehyde in there, so I decided to combine everything. At this point, things were looking way better than I could have ever expected, and I'm really glad I didn't just quit. The only issue was
Yeah,
that
don't
this
give
was
up.
all still
Homie,
really
don't-
impure,
Homie,
and
I
it
got you,
definitely
homie.
wasn't something I'd want to eat.
But yeah, don't
To
give up.
purify
homie.
it, though, there weren't
got
many
this.
options, and because of that tear gas side product with such a similar boiling point, I definitely couldn't distill it. In my mind, this left me with only one real option, and that was to try and use sodium bisulfite. So I added a small
Words
amount of it to a
science.
beaker, along with about 15 mils of water. I then turned on the stirring, and when it had eventually dissolved, it was time to add all my oil. Considering that when I did this for the first attempt, it was a total failure, I was honestly a bit scared. It's finally the moment I've been waiting for. However, there wasn't anything that I could do about that, and I just dumped it all in. I was really hoping that it would almost instantly solidify,
Here goes
but it
nothing.
kind of just looked like it did with the first attempt. It was just a bunch of oil floating around in some water, and I honestly started getting really concerned. It's not doing anything. However, over the next few minutes, it slowly got cloudier and cloudier, and it eventually formed a little ball. The moment that I saw this, I knew that I'd successfully made benzaldehyde, and I was immediately relieved. It actually worked.
Yeah.
But
Thank
anyway,
God.
what was forming here was something called a benzaldehyde sodium bisulfite adduct, and right now it was all clumped as a ball because the reaction wasn't done yet. So I just let it continue stirring, and over the next 20 minutes, the ball slowly fell apart.
Good.
Eventually, it had completely disintegrated, and what I had to do next was isolate all of this bisulfite adduct. So I just quickly poured it all into a filter, and I turned on my vacuum pump to pull away the water. I then poured in some diethyl ether, except now none of the benzaldehyde would be soluble because it was all trapped as the adduct. The magical part, though, was that everything that wasn't benzaldehyde was still soluble, especially that tear gas stuff, and it would all get washed away. Just to make
Good.
sure that it was as
Pulling
clean
a
as
vacuum on it.
possible, I washed it several more
Yeah,
times
and
with
washing it
ether,
a couple times. Yeah.
and when I was done, I had some crispy white powder. In theory, this was a bunch of nice and pure benzaldehyde
nice and
adduct,
crispy.
but it didn't smell anything
Nice
like
and crispy
cherries,
and satisfying.
and I was gonna have to turn it back into benzaldehyde. Thankfully, this was supposed to be pretty easy to do, and I just
is
had to
probably
add a
one of my most
concentrated
favorite new
solution of
videos that he
sodium
made,
carbonate to a small
Because it's such a
separatory funnel.
toxic chemical, but turning
Then
it
after
into grape
that,
soda.
to get the reaction started, I just had to dump in all of my powder. The moment that it touched the sodium carbonate, it should have been reacting, and the bisulfite adduct was supposed to be falling apart.
It's
It was
falling like
supposed to be
flakes in there.
decomposing back into just regular sodium bisulfite and releasing
like
the
flakes.
benzaldehyde. To really make sure that it would all
Reminds me of
react,
Idaho
I
Spuds
shook it
mashed
around
potatoes.
and added a bunch more base, and after that, I was really excited by what I saw. At the top, there was clearly a layer of oil forming, and
Which
this
is-
was my
which is
nice
the
and
type
pure
of mashed potatoes I
benzaldehyde.
liked since I was a kid.
In an
And I haven't
ideal
ate it in a
world,
long
I could
time.
have
I
just
should eat it
sucked the
again.
oil layer off the top, but the water was still super cloudy,
So I can get
which
so I
told
can
me that
get
a
some
bunch of
nice
it hadn't
memories
separated.
and flashbacks of my
To
childhood.
get out all of it, I would have to use diethyl ether again, and I dumped in a decent amount. I then shook it
I
around
used to
just
know
like
how to
every
make it
other
myself.
time, and when I was done,
which is pretty
the
cool.
difference was pretty obvious. Basically, all of the benzaldehyde was now in that upper ether layer, and I carefully drained away the
Yeah,
water.
absolutely.
I
Yep.
then did the super lazy method, and I just dumped the drying
Yep,
agent
looking forward to
directly
collabing.
into the funnel. Now, the only thing left to do was to get rid of the ether, so for hopefully the very last time, I filtered everything into a small flask. I also chose to completely skip the distillation, and I just
I
attached
might
my
raid
vacuum
somebody
pump,
today if I
and I
see
pulled the
somebody I can raid.
vacuum. Then after that,
Depends.
I patiently waited, and I watched the volume slowly go down, and eventually,
It depends.
it
We'll have to see
thankfully
in a few
stopped
minutes.
decreasing. What I was left with looked like a really nice and almost colorless oil, and the moment that I saw this, I was really relieved. I was almost 100% sure that this was pure benzaldehyde, and the struggle was finally over. Just to be absolutely sure that it was pure, though,
my neck's itchy.
I had to do something called an HNMR. So I took a small sample of it and loaded it into
back
the
into
machine,
the NMR machine.
and this was the result that I got. It basically confirmed that I had some nice and pure benzaldehyde, and now I could taste it without worrying that it would instantly kill me. I could
Good.
also finally use it to make my cherry soda, but before doing
finally. Nice
that,
and
I
pure
felt
and
that
fresh
I had to know what
benzaldehyde.
pure benzaldehyde tasted like. Okay, got this little pipette tip. Okay. That's so much worse than I thought. Oh, it's horrible. It burns. It's kind of bitter.
Yeah, like cherry cough syrup to
Awful.
an extent.
Okay, that was pretty much as bad as I expected, because flavors on their own are usually pretty nasty.
Yeah.
With that being said, though, it was now finally time to try and make some amazing cherry soda, and I decided to go with the same base recipe that I used for the grape soda. The only difference was that I used even more sugar, and I added about 65 grams. Then on top of this, I added 1.5 grams of citric acid and
Yep.
0.1 grams of ascorbic acid,
Yep,
and I filled it up with a bunch of distilled water.
Yep, sodas have.
It of course wouldn't be real cherry soda
citric
without
acid.
the color,
You look on
so
the can
I
or
also
anything,
added
they
some
have
green
citric
food
acid.
dye. Then after that, I added a stir rod that was covered with red dye,
Like for example, the
and I
Pepsi.
mixed it around.
Oh, like for example, pause. Like for example, the Pepsi I'm drinking right now. If you look on the can, in the ingredients list, it says citric acid. Citric. Oh, god damn it! Go. I hate this. But yeah.
Eventually, it was looking pretty good, and I now had the base dye, and I mixed it around. Soda without the color, so I also... The only difference was that I
have to
used
go
even
back,
more
sorry,
sugar, and
But
I
yeah, if
added
you look on
about
the can, it
65
says
grams.
it has citric acid.
Then on top of this,
It has citric
I added
acid.
1.5 grams of citric acid,
Which is
and
very accurate.
0.1 grams of ascorbic acid, and I filled it up with a bunch of distilled water. It of course wouldn't be real cherry soda without the color, so I also added some green food dye. Then after that, I added a stir rod that was covered with red dye, and I mixed it around. Eventually, it was looking pretty good, and I now had the base of the soda. At this point, though, it was just red-colored sugar water, and the last thing that I had to add was my tasty benzaldehyde.
Your tasty and pure
I wasn't exactly
benzaldehyde.
sure how much I had to use, but based on something that I found online, it said that fruit juice usually contained 124 ppm and up to around
per
300.
million.
Most juices also have a bunch of other flavors though, and considering I'd only be using benzaldehyde, I decided to go with the max amount. So I quickly pulled out about 0.15 mils, and I shot it into the soda base. Normally, benzaldehyde's almost completely insoluble in water, but I think that the citric acid I included acts as an emulsifier and allows it to actually dissolve. Either way though, I now had some really artificial cherry juice, and all I had to do was carbonate it. To do this, I just used one of those home carbonation things,
Yep, a soda
and I
stream.
blasted it with a bunch of CO2 gas. Then, when I eventually felt that it was looking good, I carefully took it off, and now I was apparently done. I could finally try the cherry soda that I had worked so hard for, and I was just hoping that it wouldn't be terrible.
There we go. Nile cherry soda.
Smells good. Smells like super fake cherry. it's actually good.
Yay!
I'm like shocked. I feel like
It's
this is
actually
one of the
pretty
first
good.
things I've ever made that
Success.
is good.
And yes, I watched this
It just
before,
tastes good.
but I wanted to watch it again because it's so fucking cool.
I think it tastes pretty close to just regular cherry soda. I mean, with just benzaldehyde, it's not exactly the most complex flavor profile, but it's like 90% there. Just as an objective rating. It's like an 8 on 10. Maybe a 7. No, okay, no, an 8 on 10. I could 100% serve this to people, and they would have no idea that it was made from paint thinner. Okay, so my paint thinner soda turned out to be way better than I thought, and I'm still kind of shocked that it really did just taste like regular soda. To me, this made it even more of a success, and I'm glad that I didn't actually completely give up on this project. I still don't really understand why it was such a pain, but I think that trying to extract the benzaldehyde with a solvent, like many procedures said to do, just doesn't work very well. Either way, though, I'm just happy that in the end, I was actually able to do it, and that I was able to turn a horrible combination of toxic and carcinogenic chemicals into a beautiful cherry soda. Now, on a bit more of a personal note, I think that some of you might have noticed
Looks very delicious.
that I haven't been posting a lot of videos lately. The reason for this is kind of complicated, and it's a combination of moving workspaces, making shorts, working on a lot of big projects, and
We now hit the 3-hour mark. That was so fun. I enjoyed hanging out with y'all today. It was such a nice time. And I will archive this one since this was very chill and very nice. So I'll be uploading this on my YouTube channel. So, yeah. Maybe y'all can go there and drop a like for me. When it's done uploading, that is. But anyway, thank y'all so much for coming, and let's see if there's anybody we can raid. Oh.
A lack of organization. All of this year, though, I've been working on fixing that, and I've also been working on over 10 videos.
Yes. Yes. Nice. Okay. Alright. That was a nice and chill time. And then people ended up coming towards the end, and I loved it. I'm glad I'm glad some people came by. It makes me happy. Alright, Twitch, can you load? Stop being a slow poke. Is anybody who can raid? Yes! Yes, yes. Alright, we are gonna be raiding Pisha VT. Be sure to go give her lots of love and support, and go say hey to the nice, cute and funny slug lolly. The new model was rigged! Whoa, I didn't realize this! The new model was rigged! Whoa! Cool! Awesome! And it's super cute. And a very nice tummy. Alright, we are going to be rating Pisha VT once again. Go drop by and go give her lots of love. Go give her lots of love and support. Rating it / raid, okay. Oh, actually, never mind. Okay, never mind. We're not gonna raid them. Because right now, I realized they have a sub-only chat. Oh, follower or subscriber? Oh, follower or subscriber only. Okay. Okay, well, I'll raid them then. Just be sure to go give them a follow and say, hey, they're really cool and they are a very sweet person. liked. Be sure to go visit her, go give her lots of love and cuddles, and be sure to go give her a follow if y'all want to chat, since they have that turned on. And right now they are playing, yeah. And right now they are playing Power World, which is the big new hit early access game right now. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed their new model that's rigged, and it's so cute, and I love it. Definitely must sexual. Anyway, I'll see y'all tomorrow. And I hope y'all have a nice rest of y'all's day. And I will see y'all tomorrow at around the same time. Around the same time. I'll see y'all then, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.